you know, if he was a spy, in the history of spies, he's probably the worst spy. Even as a Congress agent, like, it doesn't make sense. It's an extreme election campaign. Let's go launch a military invasion on like Darbar Sahib. Like, it just doesn't pan out as any logical theory.
But India pushes this narrative that there is no support for Khalistan.
Yeah.
On the other hand, they're absolutely terrified.
People in Punjab do want Khalistan, they do want their freedom, and everywhere outside of Punjab, everywhere, every diaspora country outside of Punjab where there's a strong diaspora population, UK, Canada, America, why is it that there's so much space for Khalistan? They're the same people that left Punjab and came here. Over here, the government's not going to come and try to burn down your house because you're putting up a picture of a Shaheed Singh, or, you know, you're doing the Shaheedi Smagan. I'm going to try to arrest and murder your whole family. There's space here.
Yeah. If there wasn't the support in Punjab, then there wouldn't be Shaheedi Yadgars in Punjab.
This idea, this is fringe. So the one thing behind Singh's photos are literally in Sachkhand Sri Harmandir, most visited places in the world was Sachkhand Sri Harmandir Sahib, in the entire world. In the Ajaib Ghar, there's pictures of who we're talking about. This idea that this is a fringe thing, or not all Sikhs want it, literally the photos are in the
highest,
there's no bigger honour that you could possibly get.
Have you ever been to a Gurdwara and have you ever seen a photo of Gandhi, KPS Gill, Nehru?
Forget
like,
Gurdwara, even a mandir.
Even they don't accept them.
Honestly, you've never seen a picture of any hero or icon of India or Indian nationalism in any Gurdwara. I've been Gurdwara all over the world. I've never seen it.
If they think that we are so marginalized and we are a fringe element, then why did they have to send like nearly 100,000 cops to arrest Amritpal Singh? You know, let him speak and fizzle out. Jehdi movement hai hi nahi. Fir dar kaada hai? Fir why do you amend your constitution every third month, you know, to nab Sikh? Imagine if duniya ch kadi bhi kithe idda nahi hoya. You know, you're talking about casting a vote and that becomes a criminalized idea. Why they have done that? Because they know ki je ithe referendum ho gaya to kinne jitna.
So hopefully you guys have seen the 4-part series that we've created, going through and marking 40 years since June 1984. And what we mentioned in those podcasts was that we'll do a special Q&A session at the end with our panelists, just to answer the questions that you guys have sent in. So thank you so much for those questions. It's not just questions from those who may be pro the stuff we're talking about. It's also questions from those people that have a lot to say about everything that was mentioned in the podcast. So we thought it's a good way also, you know, to see what's out there, what people are saying, and to basically destroy a lot of the arguments which are completely false, right? I think the first question, which is actually, it's multiple questions, but it all comes into one. We've touched upon this, so you don't have to spend too much time on it. It's a bit of a quick fire as well, so, you know, feel free to jump in as well. It's going back to Khalistan. What are the borders of Khalistan? And without a seaport, how can it sustain itself? And let's start with those two. So what are the borders of Khalistan? You know, everyone speaks about Khalistan. You know, if they say we want Khalistan, where is Khalistan? What is its borders? And how is it going to be practical if it doesn't have a seaport?
I mean, if you look historically, Sikh Raj was, you can look at the historic extent of Sikh Raj, and for me, like, that kind of contains the answer. Like, jinni tuadi taqat hogi, that's what determines what your borders are, like how much of the strength of the Panth has, that's what defines the borders. And I think in the previous episode, Baji was talking about, like, you know, Khalsa Raj and Sari Srishti da Raj, Sikh, they claim that. And, you know, the Sikh Raj during Lahore Darbar, or even before that, was incredibly prosperous, and, you know, the ground hasn't changed in that way. So yeah, I think it depends on our military capabilities.
And that changes from time to time, you know. It depends on your alliances, it depends on the might you have at that time. I mean, they used to say this thing that sun never sets on British Empire, and look, they've now just screwed to one island, you know. They might even lose Scotland and Ireland very soon, you know, you never know. So this all depends on the time. The other thing that what you talked about is it landlocked? You know, how is it going to survive if it's landlocked? I mean, look, we were just discussing about micronation. You know, Liechtenstein, San Marino, a lot of Switzerland. Let's just say, you know, a lot of other European. I think it's 19 European countries are all landlocked. उन्होंने कोई port नहीं लगता. How are they surviving? बड़ा वधिया चल रहा है. Per capita, they are the richest. You need to be wary of what resources you have. We have the most fertile land in the world. We have the most, rich water resource. I mean, if you ignore the way Indian government has plundered it, as we talked in the 1966 section of the podcast, how they plundered all the water, how they sent that away, violating the riparian nature of the water. So I think ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਬਹੁਤ ਕੁਛ ਹੈ. The other thing we have is a rich diaspora. We are now scattered in different countries. So we picked up the good things from everywhere. Khalsa har jagah vasda. When Maharaj says ujad jao, that's sakhi, hai na? Is like ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਗੁਣ ਲੈ ਲਏ ਨੇ, ਆਪਣੇ ਔਗੁਣ ਗਵਾ ਲਏ ਨੇ ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਜਗ੍ਹਾਵਾਂ ਤੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਕਰਕੇ. So we have the most dynamic workforce, I would say. ਹਰ ਖਿੱਤੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਐਸਟਿਊਟ ਹਾਂ, ਹਰ ਖਿੱਤੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਫੈਲੇ ਹੋਏ ਹਾਂ. And there is a little personal thing that I would like to mention. My pradada ji, he came from when Pakistan and India ਜਦੋਂ ਬਣ ਗਿਆ, ਤੇ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਉਦੋਂ 82 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਜਦੋਂ 84 ਹੋਇਆ. ਤੇ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਬਣਿਆ ਸੀ ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਆ ਗਏ ਸੀ ਉੱਧਰੋਂ ਦੀ. ਹੁਣ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਦੀ 84 ਹੋ ਗਈ ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਧਰੋਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਚੱਲੇ ਹਾਂ ਦਿੱਲੀੋਂ. ਸੋ ਪਰ ਵਿਦਿਨ ਈਅਰਸ ਉਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਪੈਰਾਂ 'ਤੇ ਖੜ੍ਹ ਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਘਰ ਵੀ ਬਣਾ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਗੱਡੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਬਣਾ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ. ਸੋ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅਡੈਪਟੇਬਿਲਿਟੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਮ ਕੋਲ, ਉਹ ਯੂ ਕਾਂਟ ਮੈਚ ਦੈਟ. ਇੱਥੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੀ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਏ ਸੀ ਸਾਰੇ, ਅੱਜ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ, 300 ਤੋਂ ਉੱਤੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਨੇ. ਇਹ ਸਭ ਕੁਛ ਕਿਸੇ ਹੋਰ ਕੌਮ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੰਪੇਅਰ ਕਰੋ ਤਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਆਊਟ ਨੰਬਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋ ਬਾਏ ਮਲਟੀਪਲ ਟਾਈਮਸ. So the experience we've had during these 500 years, you can't match that with any other qawm. So give us a piece of land and you'll see the wonders.
Right. Very nice. Anyone to add to that, or was I move on?
That's it. I think give us a piece of land to see the wonders. We talked about in the Kisan Morcha, just that little border of Delhi. That's a glimpse, a flicker of what safety for women and children. No one went hungry. There, the Shambu border has its own free press. They got their own newspaper in circulation. Give us a piece of land and you'll see the wonders.
Jitpa. And moving on to the next question, which is talking about land and the current land of Punjab. Why is Chandigarh a union territory? What's going on here? What's this all about?
So when in 1966, when they reorganized Punjab, they intentionally put Chandigarh as a joint capital between Haryana and Punjab and make that a UT, which is called a union territory, which is directly under the control of central government, because they don't want you to flourish. I can go into more detail if we want to talk about the industrial, because I think there was one question on the
if you want to add on to that, it says why is Punjab's industrial sector neglected?
I mean, मैं पंजाब ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੰਮਿਆ ਪਲਿਆ ਹੈ ਨਾ, and I've seen there used to be sports industry in Jalandhar that went to Meerut. There used to be hosiery and textile industry in Ludhiana and Amritsar that went to Surat, and there was a lot of other industries that went to Baddi in Himachal Pradesh. I'll tell you a simple reason for it. What Indian government did was they created special economic zones. So special economic zone, if you open a factory in a special economic zone, you don't pay tax for 5 years. 50% of that is funded by the government. So they have actually inflicted an econocide on Punjab intentionally. Punjab ਦੇ ਆਸ-ਪਾਸ ਹੈਵਨਸ ਕ੍ਰੀਏਟ ਕਰਕੇ, ਟੈਕਸ ਹੈਵਨਸ ਕ੍ਰੀਏਟ ਕਰਕੇ, ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਸਾਰੀ ਇੰਡਸਟਰੀ ਚੱਲ ਜਾਏ. ਮੇਰੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਅੱਖੀ ਦੇਖਦਿਆਂ ਸਾਰੀ ਇੰਡਸਟਰੀ ਖਤਮ ਹੋਈ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ. ਦੂਸਰੀ ਗੱਲ, ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਇੱਕ ਸ਼ੋਅ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਬੈਠੇ ਸੀਗੇ. ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਦੇਰ ਇਜ਼ ਸਮਬਡੀ ਕਾਲਡ ਪ੍ਰੀਤਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਫਰਮ ਆਕਸਫੋਰਡ, ਆਈ ਗੈਸ ਆਕਸਫੋਰਡ 'ਚ ਪੜ੍ਹਿਆ ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਐਂਡ ਹੀ ਇਜ਼ ਅ ਬਿਟ ਸort of comrade minded, ਹੈ ਨਾ. But even he agreed to one thing when he said, Kanda, Punjab government used to apply for sugar mills. Like if you see what is the primarily occupation of Punjab is agriculture, right? But a processed agriculture produce is 5 times more. It costs its value is 5 times more. For example, raw wheat and processed wheat, raw wheat and raw rice and shelled rice is 5 times more in value. So when a Punjab government used to apply for example, sugarcane mills or rice sheller, they used to get a cross on the file saying, ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਕੰਮ ਹੈ produce ਕਰਨਾ, ਸਾਡਾ ਕੰਮ ਹੈ ਉਹਨੂੰ shell ਕਰਨਾ. So I'll give you one little example. Punjab ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ rice grow ਹੁੰਦਾ, but then it goes to Gujarat, and from Gujarat they shell it when it becomes 5 times more costly, and then it goes to Karachi. Instead of Punjab and Lahore is 20 minutes away. This just tells you the story. They don't want you to earn money. All they want is for you to do the donkey job for them, which is basically growing it and sending it in trucks to them at minimum support price, which all the Kisans are fighting for. It's very convenient for them. ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਸਤਾ ਦੇ ਦਿਓ ਸਮਾਨ, ਉਹਦੇ ਤੇ 5 ਗੁਣਾ profit ਅਸੀਂ add ਕਰਾਂਗੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਕਮਾਵਾਂਗੇ, ਹੈ ਨਾ?
It's a calculated process.
That's it. So if we had the cargo port or something like that, if they've given us I'll give you another example. In my lifetime, the Tata and Reliance, they're the biggest companies in India, है ना? They wanted to open a plant. The Tata wanted to open the cheapest car, which is a Nano, yeah? They wanted to open a plant in Sangrur. ਜਿਹੜੀ central government see, they put a cross on the file saying it's disturbed area. Reliance wanted to open a center there. They said, no, it's a disturbed area. It's too close to the border. So is Gujarat. And Gujarat was under the per capita income. It was on the 24th mark in 1966. And now it's on 3rd. We were on the number 1 in per capita GDP. We are on number 17th. So this just tells you the story, how this whole econocide has happened. Genocide has happened. We've lost a generation and we've lost all. The other thing I'll just like to mention, ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ 'ਚ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਲਿਖ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹੋ, you got no job in Punjab. The maximum engineering colleges, they are in Punjab. So they are basically making you an engineer. So then you have to go and work in Hyderabad, Calcutta, Bangalore, you know, all these Indian sort of silicon cities. So, but if so, what I'm telling you is this is a muscle drain and brain drain at the same time. So ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਲਿਖ ਕੇ ਕੁਝ ਕਰਨਾ ਵੀ ਚਾਹੋ, ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਪੰਜਾਬ 'ਚ ਕੋਈ ਜੌਬ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ. You can't have a job in Punjab. So basically, they're very strategically draining you out of Punjab, you know, and draining your resources.
And just a question that adds on to that, that's not on this list, is we can see those effects today, right? With the amount of Indian students that are moving out, or of Punjabi students, right? So is this directly because of this, or what else is contributing to that?
I mean, 100%. One is an economic factor. Now you take GDP breakdown of this country. 80% of that comes from information technology processing. Agriculture will only be maybe account for 5%. This just tells you that any developing country cannot just survive off agriculture. Agriculture is a primary occupation, but then you got to have a very healthy tertiary sector that supports it, and very healthy industrial sector that supports the food processing industry. The other thing is the persecution. We all have fled because Sikhan de siran te mul dobara pੈ ਗਏ ਉੱਥੇ. So if you have to save yourself or save your generation, then you got to evade, because otherwise ਤੁਸੀਂ assimilate ਹੋ ਜਾਓਗੇ mostly. So ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵੀ ਉੱਥੇ active ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਉੱਥੋਂ ਜਾਂ ਜਾਣਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਜਾਂ ਜੇਲ੍ਹ 'ਚ ਬੰਦ ਹੁੰਦਾ. So, you know, that is another kind of effect.
And you know, the thing is, like with the economic progress, Sikhs can't set their own economic policies or their agricultural policies. That's all being set by Delhi. So we can't create a model for the benefit of Punjab that respects its environment, that respects the culture of its people and their relationship with the land, in order to develop like infrastructure, industry, that, you know, is in line with our vision of Sarbat Khalsa. And that shift is never going to occur. Punjab is never going to be given rights to set its own policies. And it's not just about, like, you know, the development for the sake of development, right? Like, you know, if Punjab was economically rich and viable, it would still part of the Indian state. That in itself wouldn't be a solution to our problems, because that model relies on, those industries rely on polluting and looting the environment in order for them to thrive. They're not sustainable models, essentially. So that migration that you're seeing, correctly, it's a displacement. Ujara hai Punjabi de vich assi kahiye, is not ke lok utho ja rahe ha, utho ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਧੱਕਿਆ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਕਿ there's no future, they don't see a future there. And because their whole existence is being tied to just that economic aspect, so they're leaving Punjab in order to get their roti, versus just a generation previously, they were willing to sacrifice everything to envision a different future. There's a really great paper on this by Barinder Pal Singh called The Rise of Sikh Militancy, an appraisal of the economic factor. And they talk about like what kind of model that they're envisioning for the people. I'm sure we can link it in the description at some point.
This might be a really silly question, but it links to it, that to me it seems like from what you guys are saying, if Chandigarh was the capital of Punjab and it was in a union territory, then would that mean that Punjab would have its own rights to do whatever it wants, or still not? Or is that
Chandigarh was designed by a French architect called Le Corbusier as a planned city, and like he was like a famous French architect, and he had this architecture called brutalism. That's why like the buildings in Chandigarh look a certain way, and it was designed by them, in my opinion, to be like an administrative capital for the British, for them to facilitate all of the stuff that they were taking out of Punjab. So Chandigarh, it kind of explains why they treat it in the way they do. They see it as being too good for Punjab. That we're not worthy of Chandigarh, right? As like a planned modern city. So now all of the elite from that area live in Chandigarh. So Chandigarh being allocated again as the capital of Punjab, I mean, I'm sure administratively it would work well for Punjab, and it would let Punjab function as a state within the Union of India. But again, like justice for 1984, if like all the perpetrators were arrested, the killers of November, or the police officers, or Punjab's like GDP was the highest in India, that still doesn't solve the issue, which is the question's one of our liberation, not like, as just one thing Khalra said, like the price of rice or wheat is not just purely an economic calculation. It is a question of liberation. So Chandigarh ta, Sikhan da Raj Delhi Peshawar tak siga, and
Sant Ji said this as well. He said that if the price of rice goes up, but tode gatrech karpani, then what have we kind of gained? So that's what we'll keep the kind of nishan on.
Thank you so much for that. Kind of taking a step back, going back to territory as well again. Why don't Sikhs claim West Punjab, Pakistan also?
Because what stands in the way between West Punjab and East Punjab, Charda and Lenda Punjab, is one of the most militarized borders in the world. And we touched on it in one of the previous episodes. That was by design. Punjab was split. The partition was of Punjab, and it was a strategic division of land in order to create conflict. But a memory of Punjab survives on both sides. On both sides of that border, you have Punjabi language. You have Sikh, sites that are tied to Guru Sahib's Atiyas, and you have the Lahore Darbar, and you have all sorts of stuff, right? That's on that side. So hopefully, like at one day, like a lot of these questions for me, they operate on this assumption that that area, that the geography of South Asia survives or remains the same, and Khalistan is just planted on top. In my opinion, that geography fundamentally alters with the creation of Khalistan. You're talking about a local a geographic liberation struggle that's going to redraw those borders and change that entire region. And it's not going to look the same. Those India, Pakistan, those countries don't survive that process, because in the south of India, you've got the Dravidian states. You've got like this whole Naxal red corridor of Maoists fighting for their liberation on one side. You've got multiple liberation movements. You've got Kashmir, and Pakistan, just like India, wasn't ever a place before. These are artificially created countries, and Punjab on both sides of the border is united by its shared Boli, right? Like they speak Punjabi, they have a shared culture. Punjab is a geographical region, the region of the 5 river basin. So I don't think that region remains the same with Khalistan emerging as a power base.
Plus, I think this is a political question as well. We can ask India, like, why don't you claim Bangladesh or Pakistan? It's kind of like they want to fight us on 2 different avenues. Right now, our fight is with the regime who's committed a genocide. So we're definitely getting Punjab, Haryana, Himachal, which was the, before the Punjab was organized very viciously before 1966. We want to claim on that first, and then we'll see. The other thing is, once your regime is set, once you're ruling and governing and you're giving governance, a lot of other ilaqe will automatically come to you. Because ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹ ਦੇਖਣਗੇ ਕਿ ਯਾਰ ਇੱਥੇ ਗਰੀਬੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ, ਇੱਥੇ ਭੁੱਖਮਰੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ, ਇੱਥੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕ ਵਧੀਆ ਸੌ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਸਾਰੇ ਧਰਮਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਵਧੀਆ ਕੰਮ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ, ਐਂਡ ਦੇ ਵਿਲ ਆਲ। ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਪੋਡਕਾਸਟ 'ਤੇ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਜਾਣ ਦਾ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੌਕਾ ਮਿਲਿਆ, ਅਤੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਅਜਿਹੇ ਮੁਸਲਮਾਨ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਸੀਗੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਕਾਸ਼ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਦਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਨਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ, ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਗਰੀਬ ਨਾ ਹੁੰਦੇ. This is how they feel.
I've seen just some Pakistani podcasts actually, and they're talking about a revival in a Punjabi movement, Punjab's, Pakistan's, and they discuss this lots as well because the national identity is forced on them. Because Pathans aren't the same as Punjabis, which aren't the same as the Baloch people. Yeah? So that's similarly, they've got a forced identity, and the Punjabi Pakistanis also feel the same way. And what Bhai Sab's just said, I remember listening to this podcast, and he goes, Ranjit Singh, we should idolize Ranjit Singh. The Pakistani Punjabis are saying that actually the creation of the state has kind of vilified him. But our region has never been as prosperous as Ranjit Singh, and that's fairly recent.
Reminds me of that, like there was no capital punishment during Ranjit Singh's Raj, and the strictest punishment you could get was to be banished from Punjab. Because Punjab in Nakushahal Siga, that was a punishment to go somewhere else. So like Bas was saying, that when Khalistan comes into existence, the other surrounding areas are naturally going to want to like join the party.
And so that's a great question to go into. How would Sikhs rule? If you're given that example, and now people are saying that if you had your Raj, how would you rule?
You know, for you to rule, you need a constitution. For us, the constitution is Shri Guru Granth Sahib. Guru Granth Sahib Ji gives us all the life sciences, all the moral lessons, how we need to conduct ourselves daily basis. And the motto of our Raj is Sab Sukhali Vuttiyan Eho Halimi Rajiyo. ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹਰ ਚੀਜ਼ ਮੋਡਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈ, you know, ਹਰ ਬੰਦਾ ਹਲੇਮੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈ, ਹਰ ਚੀਜ਼ ਹਲੇਮੀ 'ਚ ਹੈ. Now you see all these nations, they behave like, you know, like rough kids. You know, ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਕੱਢ ਦਾਂਗੇ, ਇਹ ਇਲਾਕਾ ਲੈ ਲਾਂਗੇ, ਕਿਸੇ ਤੇ ਮਿਜ਼ਾਈਲ ਸੁੱਟ ਦਾਂਗੇ, ਜੋ ਇਜ਼ਰਾਈਲ 'ਚ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ, ਜੋ ਗਾਜ਼ਾ 'ਚ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ, ਜੋ ਯੂਕਰੇਨ 'ਚ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ, ਸਭ. ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਗਵਰਨੈਂਸ ਐਡੀ ਸਟੈਂਡਰਡ ਦੀ ਹੈ, ਐਡੀ ਪ੍ਰਿੰਸੀਪਲਡ ਹੈ, ਤਾਂ ਹੀ ਉਹ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਰਾਜ ਵਾਪਸ ਆਵੇ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਰਾਜ ਖੁੱਸ ਜਾਣੇ. ਸੋ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕੁਛ ਬਣਾਉਣ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਨਹੀਂ, ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਛ ਤਿਆਰ ਹੈ. ਸਾਡਾ ਸਿੱਖ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ, ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਜਿਉਂਦੇ ਜਾਗਦੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਨੇ. ਐਂਡ ਸਮ ਟਾਈਮ ਆਈ ਰੀਅਲੀ ਫੀਲ ਟੈਰੇਬਲ ਵੈਨ ਪੀਪਲ ਸੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਲੀਡਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ. ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਜਿਉਂਦਾ ਜਾਗਦਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਹੈ. ਇਹ ਸਕ੍ਰਿਪਚਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ, ਇਹ ਜਿਉਂਦਾ ਜਾਗਦਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਹੈ. ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦਿੱਕਤ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਅਸੀਂ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਹੁਕਮਨਾਮਾ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਸਾਡਾ ਸਾਰਾ ਸ਼ੰਕਾ ਦੂਰ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ. ਇਹ ਜਿਉਂਦਾ ਜਾਗਦਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਹੈ, ਇਹਦੀ ਕਮਾਂਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ, ਸਿੱਧੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ ਇਹਦੇ ਆਸ਼ੇ 'ਤੇ ਚੱਲਣ ਦੀ. ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਨਾ ਕਿ ਹਸਤੀ ਸਿਰ ਜੋ ਅੰਕਸ ਹੈ, ਐਰੰਡ ਜੋ ਸਿਰ ਦੇ, ਮਨ ਤਨ ਆਗੇ ਰੱਖ ਕੇ ਉਬੀ ਸੇਵ ਕਰੇ, ਉਹ ਗੁਰਮੁਖ ਆਪ ਨਿਵਾਰੀਐ ਸਭ ਰਾਜ ਸ੍ਰਿਸ਼ਟ ਕਾਲੇ. ਅਸੀਂ ਬਸ ਆਪਣੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਮੰਨਣੀ ਹੈ, ਐਂਡ ਦੈਟਸ ਵਾਟ ਵੀ ਨੀਡ.
You know, I fully agree with the spirit of what Paisab was saying. You know, like we've been doing Raj and creating a system in which people have been living and been happy and thriving long before the idea of the constitution even existed in the world. So the constitution and these modern nation states, Sikhi de more like they're nyane, they're bacche, but we look at them as natural entities. And like Maaf Karna, like I personally don't agree with the comparison of like Guru Granth Sahib Ji is our, you know, Chon manifesto, Guru Granth Sahib Ji is our constitution. Minu gal thori ji uppri lagdi. Yeah, I understand fully. I get the spirit in which that remark is made. For me, that, you know, the latter part of what Bhai Sahib was saying, that Guru Sahib is sade jonde jagde Guru, like oh is duniyavi cheezaਂ ਤੋਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡੇ ਆ. Like for me, like this question of like what system will it be? The Khalsa is not tied to any dunyavi system. We want to create a structure which ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦਾ ਭਲਾ ਹੋਵੇ. If it doesn't work, we change it and we make a new structure. It's not like here in the UK you got one party or the other party, the red one or the blue one. They're both pretty much the same. They change people now. I think the red party has people from the blue party, and it's just all like a khichdi ji. It doesn't have a meaning or a value. But our thing is we want to create a structure that benefits people, and it should be demolished and revived and renewed and continually perfected and developed and evolved until it does that. And we've seen that during Ranjit Singh Lahore Darbar's time, the systems that they created in a very short amount of time, and they increased the literacy to one of the highest levels in the world because they're not tied to one particular model, but the purpose of what that model is. Sab sukhali vuttiyan jidda paisa.
I think ਜਿਹੜੀ ਲਾਸਟ ਪੋਡਕਾਸਟ ਇੱਕ ਬੜੀ ਨਾ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਗੱਲ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਜੋ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਡਿਸਟਰੋਏ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ. ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨਾ, ਜਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਡੂਬੈ ਤਸਕਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੇਵੈ ਭਾਏ ਨਾ ਸਾਕੇ ਜਲ. ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਪਿਰਿਟ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇੱਕ ਪੰਥ, ਇੱਕ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਨੂੰ ਗੁਰਗੱਦੀ ਹੈ, ਇੱਕ ਪੰਥ ਨੂੰ ਗੁਰਗੱਦੀ ਹੈ. ਸੋ ਪੰਥ ਉਹ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਦੀ ਫਿਲੋਸਫੀ ਨੂੰ ਦੁਨੀਆ 'ਤੇ ਲਿਆਉਂਦਾ. ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸੱਚਖੰਡ ਲੋਕੀ ਅਰਸ਼ੋਂ ਪਾਰ ਸਮਝਦੇ ਨੇ, ਉਹ ਖਾਲਸੇ ਨੇ ਸੱਚਖੰਡ ਇੱਥੇ ਬਣਾ ਦੇਣਾ. you know, the way it will work, the way the whole thing will work. So I think I agree that it's not, I think it's not good to compare it with any sort of, dunyavi manifestation such as constitution. But I think the ethos, the guiding forces we have within the Panth and the Granth are enough and more than a nation. We are already a nation anyway. Sorry to say.
No, you're
Hanji.
right? Like I understand the point where it's coming from. Like, when a nation is created, the akhri jet of like a successful desh in today's time is like vichartara di jet, right? Like, what is your philosophy of how you're running your nation? And oh, jiri vichartara di jet, Guru Sahib's put in our choli and karo toreya sanu. Like, we've got that. The philosophy, the system, the ethos. Guru Sahib's given that khajana to us and sent us out from our homes. Our farj is कि ਅਸੀਂ ਉੱਤੇ ਪੱਕੇ ਰਹੀਏ, ਸਿਧਾਂਤਾਂ ਤੇ ਪੱਕੇ ਰਹੀਏ, ਤਾਂ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਸਦੀਵੀ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹੀਏ. Like, we continually struggle in order to enact those teachings.
I think the Western mindset has really polluted our minds in terms of thinking that you need a majority rule. So in democracy, suppose a democracy, you have an election every 5 years, you vote once and that's it, you're stuck with your MP and your representative. But when the Khalsa's ruled, it's always been participatory and it's always been a minority rule. So it goes against this Western philosophy that you have a majority rule. So even the Indian state's based on a majority rule because that's a vote bank. Pakistan's based on that. And our whole system from day one has always been a minority rule. So we've always been a minority whenever we've ruled. So Banda Singh Bahadur ruled and anyone under his barja and his rule was enjoyed freedom. Doesn't matter what religion or faith they were. Then the Dal Khalsa came and ruled. Then that was continued by Maharaja Ranjit Singh. But it was always a minority rule. And then if the Khalsa was ruling that, even on a minority basis, Panj Pyare, if they were selected or however they did the system, it worked. But we've been so polluted in our minds that we think you can only get majority rule, you can't do anything otherwise. But our Shiraj has proved that's occurred in the past. So there's no reason why that can't occur again. It doesn't matter what we call the constitution or how we term or word these things. It doesn't really matter.
Like, speaks to deeper issues of why it is we view ourselves as inferior and try to always continue to look through this lens of like how they're doing it, trying to model it based on that.
But our Itihas goes against all of that.
Of course.
And it's proven it
We
as
have our
well.
own
That's the
ways,
worst thing. It'd be different if our theories were not based upon fact and proof of historical evidence, but it's all there.
Based on all the nations that exist today, we're the only ones who actually worked, right?
And every time Sikhs have been in power, we've never committed genocide. And every other rule that's been in power has committed like mass atrocities and oppression. So you look at our Atiyas, for me, it's like not even a question about looking forward. Right, in all of our Atiyas, like Paji is saying, we've never done these things, and it's worked and it's functioned, and it's older than these like
like you said in the previous podcast,
systems.
these are alien concepts, doesn't it?
Yeah, like I think there's a book, like we said 2000 saal gulam rehne wali qaum. Like people refer to it. I think there's someone said to me about a book that even goes further than that. Actually looks at how long the kind of natives, the indigenous people of India, have been conquered for. And then we've seen how they acted, right? So these are like deep-rooted like traumas or issues that they've got, like that they're unpacking, and it seems to be something similar around every empire around the world, apart from us. So why didn't we? What's different about us? That's the difference about us.
And yeah, of all these other nations, we're the ones questioning ourselves.
Yeah, we're the ones saying maybe we're not, and we don't need to be so rigid. There's good, obvious. There's might be one of your questions, the obvious, capitalism versus this versus that. These countries have fought like decades of war against a particular system that they don't like,
And each
because just because they don't like that system and they don't want people to get strangled by that concept, and they view it as a threat. Whichever way around you want to look at it, whichever way around, whether they're the communist states or the Western capitalist states, the reality is we don't need to be grounded by any of them. And we automatically just look to like one of their solutions, or what's that nation doing?
And we see that through the Guru period as well, where they constantly evolved, changed the system, whether it's the Mahants, Masans.
Yeah, exactly.
I think what we've just talking about is, this is a theory like election versus selection or something like that. But in Sikhi, the beautiful part was that there was a democratic way of dealing with things, but by the selected Siane, That's the difference. For example, I remember this, I read somewhere, Plato, that Gyani from the Greeks, है ना? He said कि जे एक ship ਨੂੰ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਚਲਾਉਣਾ ਹੈ, ਜੇ passengers ਤੋਂ ਪੁੱਛੋਗੇ ਕਿ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਚਲਾਉਣਾ ਹੈ, ਉਹ ਜੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਪੁੱਛੋ ਵੀ ਚਲੋ ਵੋਟ ਪਾਓ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਸੱਜੇ ਜਾਏ ਕਿ ਖੱਬੇ ਜਾਏ, how will that be? So only the people who are skillful, ਸਿਆਣੇ, they've reached that level, they can only decide ਕੀ policy ਕੀ ਹੋਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ.
There has to be a level of meritocracy.
Exactly.
To be
Exactly. So that's, if you see Sarbat Khalsa, if you see the way we've conducted ourselves, it's always been an election from the selected. You know, that's how it was.
I think that leads on really great to the next question, which is that if the issue is of psyche at the moment, then give some examples of how it affects Sikhs in the present day today.
The issue is of like our psyche. I mean, it impacts everything that we do today, because our imagination and our mindset is confined to the visible structures and the systems that are around us. And when we think of how we're going to do something, or why we're going to do something, or what it's going to look like, is coming from the structures that we've been living in, these confines that we've only been living in for a very short time. Like, we've got grandparents older than the Indian state. You know, like, we as a qaum are older than these countries that we're living in. Like, jado panth honda hai, like, you know, before, you know, like, half these nations didn't even exist. So I think massively the question is one of psyche, and that's what, like, a lot of theorists, you know, that talk about this colonization, you know, idea, and, you know, what it is, and its history. They talk about where we are now as in the mindset of being colonizers. They give it a word. It's called coloniality. And I think, like, our psyche, why Khalistan is so important to this question of psyche, because Khalistan gives a name to something that you don't have now. It's a massive idea. It's your azadi. It's too hard to even define. It forces you to think about these questions. What's the capital? What's the land going to look like? How's it going to work? How's this going to happen, right? So without that word Khalistan, without that name, that's the name of the struggle and the name of the Raj that we envision, you don't have these questions. It gives you big problems. You need big problems to get out of that psyche of, you know, right now, vast majority of people are just caught in that survival mode, that if they don't work, they don't eat. If they don't eat, they don't have a home. If they don't have a home, they're on the streets. So their mindset is completely confined by that. And without these bigger ideas, it becomes very difficult to imagine something different.
There's a Gurwani Pankti hai, jo kish karna so kar rahe hai. Joon karna ho kar rahe hai. But we don't accept the pana. But the other side of the psyche is, because we don't do enough naam japana, that jo kish karna so kar rahe hai. So when you read Bhairathi Singh's autobiography, he says that they had a system of communicating through telepathy. So we're talking about the internet age now.
Yeah.
But even in the Gadar party, if there was other Kamayala Singhs, that's how they were doing it. So we get really scared, like your phone, your device, your this, your that. So it's like, if you got the Kamai, it doesn't matter what you do. When you talk about the Singhs pre-84, they all say, the CID used to be there. They didn't used to know we've come and whacked someone and come back, let alone. So they're in their circle and they're still delivering. So, but that's because they had the Kamai, and then they had also, there's a hierarchy in that system. By Fajr Singh's list to Sant Jarnail Singh's list to, and it's a leadership, isn't it? But now we're just like leaderless, and then we don't listen to it, and then the psyche is really affected, because if we're not actually following Gurbani and living it, we can't see it as well. We can't see the Guru alive because we're not living that.
The thing is, in order for us to live here and survive here and face ourselves, we have to normalize Biadabi. Otherwise, we can't survive in the West, especially in these places. We can't, not even in the West, we can't survive within the nation state without having Biadabi normalized. So we look at Biadabi as on one aspect of it, right? Like the Upman of Gurbani. We don't look at the Biadabi over the Panth's Padshahi being undermined. That we form of Biadabi Khalsa Guru da Roop, right? So that Biadabi has to be normal, and we have to ignore it. And that's why, like, the Gyani becomes a figure that isn't important in the community. So the Gyani, the one who's closest to Guru Sahib, stays around Guru Sahib the most. It doesn't occupy a position of authority within the community at all, in the way that they used to, right? Like Sant Jarnail Singh, we would say Brahm Gyani, right? The Gyani. And they occupy that position because of the role that they fulfill in that time. And they push back against this interruption. They push back against any form of Biadabi being normal, whether it's physical Upman of Gurbani, or whether it's undermining the Padshahi of the Panth. So they fulfill that role. They force that interruption, that fracture, that wound. They try to heal it. and they try to exist in the world as the Azad Khalsa, and that's the ultimate, like, destruction of that psyche of the Ghulam, right? That the sari galbat is cheez de utte tiki hui hai. So them, like Sant Ji and the Singhs and Singhni, and naming these conditions is really important. So when Sant Ji says asi Ghulam ya, is not passion, it's not gallan jin mere varga karda hai, it's a deep theorizing of the condition of the Sikh. And if we are existing in Gulami, that means there's an impact on our relationship with the state, our relationship with our sanstava, our structures, our relationship with each other, and our relationship with ourselves. The Gulami has lachan, it has symptoms that manifest on every single level. That's why I can be an individual. ਹੁਣ ਮੈਂ ਮੇਰੇ ਘਰ ਨੂੰ ਚਲ ਜਾਣਾ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਘਰ ਨੂੰ ਚਲ ਜਾਣਾ, ਪਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਿੰਘ ਵਿਛੜ ਰਹੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਹ ਜਥੇਬੰਦ ਰੂਪ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, they moved together, ਘਰ-ਬਾਰ ਛੱਡਤਾ, so they existed, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਘਰ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀ ਬਣ ਗਈ, right? It's a complete different change, and ਉਹ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਉਹ ਮਨ ਬਦਲ ਜਾਂਦਾ, ਜੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੀ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੀ, ਫਿਰ ਤਾਂ all of that can be treated, I guess is a word.
And just linking to that as well in terms of Gulami, physically but also mentally as well. Why is the word Khalistan viewed as negative? And could you give some examples of propaganda? If Sikhs are just working towards Hale Miraj, right? Why is that such a negative word viewed within, you could say, the diaspora, the world, but also even in Sikh circles as well, you could say? And just to add to that question as well, where's the question here? About... is it a reality that people in Punjab don't want Khalistan? And is it just a Western ideology?
I think it's the Indian narrative. And as we mentioned in the podcast earlier, they spend millions of dollars in setting that narrative. They Khalistani ye karde ne, Khalistani wo karde ne. In contrary to what Khalistani used to do, they were socially reforming the place. They were getting haq for everybody. Forget ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਧਰਮ ਤੋਂ ਹੋਵੇ. They were setting the standards right. They were improving the conditions of that whole Suba. So obviously Indian government, they did what they had to do, was to defame us. ਪਰ ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ, ਚਲੋ ਹੁਣ ਹੌਲੀ ਹੌਲੀ ਸਾਰਾ ਪਰਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਚੱਕਿਆ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ. And ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਣੀ ਪਏਗੀ ਨਾ, that a state which has got unlimited resources and they have got a transactional power with other countries, they can set a narrative very easily. But for your community, ਹੁਣ ਸਾਨੂੰ 40 ਸਾਲ ਹੋ ਗਏ, and West and ਹੋਰ ਆਮ ਬੰਦੇ, they're soon realizing ਕਿ what we have known about this community is actually in contrary to what they do. ਇੱਕ war ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਕਿਤੇ flood ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਕਿਤੇ famine ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਪਹੁੰਚ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਬਗੈਰ ਕੋਈ ਭੇਦ ਭਾਵ ਦੇ. ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਪੋਡਕਾਸਟ 'ਚ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ, ਖਾਲਸਾ ਤਾਂ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਦੀ ਫੌਜ ਹੈ, ਇਹਨੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਦੁੱਖ ਦੇਖਣਾ ਇਹਨੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਜਾਣਾ. ਜੇ ਇਹਦੇ ਕੋਲ 2 ਰੋਟੀਆਂ ਇਹਨੇ ਦੋਵੇਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਦੋਵੇਂ ਦੇ ਦੇਣੀਆਂ, ਕੋਈ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਦਿੰਦਾ ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਆਪ ਖਾ ਲੈਂਦਾ ਨਾ. ਇਹ ਖਾਲਸੇ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰਤੀਤ ਹੈ. ਇਹ ਖਾਲਸੇ ਦਾ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਵੀ ਇਹਦੀ ਨਜ਼ਰ 'ਚ ਫਰਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ. ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ, ਜਿਸ ਅੰਦਰ ਤਾਤ ਪਰਾਈ ਹੋਵੇ ਤੇ ਇਸ ਦਾ ਕਦੇ ਨਾ ਹੋਵੇ ਭਲਾ. ਸਾਡੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਤਾਤ ਪਰਾਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਫਰਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਦਿਸਦਾ. ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ, ਉਹ ਕਿਸਾਨ ਮੋਰਚੇ ਤੇ ਸਵੇਰੇ ਪਤਾ ਹੈ ਸ਼ਾਮੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਪੁਲਸੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਡਾਂਗਾ ਮਾਰਨੀਆਂ, ਸਵੇਰੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੰਗਰ ਖਵਾ ਰਹੇ, ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਛਕੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ, ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ, ਸ਼ਾਮੀ ਡਾਂਗਾ ਵੀ ਮਾਰ ਲਿਓ, ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ. ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹਾ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਤੇ ਹੋਰ ਦੇਖੋਗੇ. ਐਂਡ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਸ਼ੰਭੂ ਬਾਰਡਰ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ, ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰਡਰ 'ਤੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਿੰਘ ਜਾਣ ਲੱਗੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਅਤੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਲੋਕ ਰੋ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਲਿਟਰਲੀ ਕਿ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਕਾਰਨ ਸਾਨੂੰ 3 ਵਕਤ ਦੀ ਰੋਟੀ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਹੈ. ਉਹ ਏਰੀਆ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਬੜਾ ਕ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਪ੍ਰੋਨ ਏਰੀਆ, ਉੱਥੇ ਕੁੜੀਆਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਬੱਚੀਆਂ ਦੀ ਇੱਜ਼ਤ ਨੂੰ ਖਤਰਾ ਸੀ, ਬਹੁਤ ਕੁਛ ਉੱਥੇ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀ. ਉੱਥੇ ਦਾ ਕ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਰੇਟ 0 'ਤੇ ਡਰੋਪ ਕਰ ਗਿਆ ਜਦੋਂ ਦੇ ਸਿੰਘ ਉੱਥੇ ਗਏ. So this is the kind of Raj we're going to have. So it is their narrative. Coming back to your second question, I'm sorry, Paji, you can add, Hannah. But your second question was?
About the people in Punjab.
Do they want Khalistan?
Do they want Khalistan?
So the answer to that is, there is this going on, this movement of non-binding referendum. If Indian government has actually, amended its constitution to criminalize under the UAPA, talking about referendum. Forget having a referendum. Talking about referendum is a crime, and they can put a sedition charge on you. Yeah? Now, imagine कि दुनिया च कदी भी किथे इतना नहीं होया कि, you're talking about casting a vote, and that becomes a criminalized idea. Why they have done that? because they know कि जे इत्थे referendum हो गया तो किन्ने जितना. They actually know, you know, and you can't compare that to all these elections they ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਹਰ 5 ਸਾਲ ਬਾਅਦ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ. That is not self-determination. I mean, India, that's how India objects to the, you know, to the self-determination ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਹਰ 5 ਸਾਲ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕਿਉਂ ਪਲੇਬਸਾਈਡ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕਿਉਂ ਰੈਫਰੈਂਡਮ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਪਿਰਿਟ ਹੈ, you know, ਸਾਡੀ civilization is like 100 times advanced than their civilization. And how can you live under ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇੰਨੀ ਡਿੱਗੀ ਹੋਈ civilization ਆ ਉਹਦੇ. ਜਿਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਮੂਵਮੈਂਟ ਨੂੰ ਡੱਕਿਆ, ਜਿਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕ੍ਰਿਮੀਨਲਾਈਜ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਇਹ ਤੋਂ ਸਾਬਿਤ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਡਰੇ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਵਾਕਈ ਇੱਥੇ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਓਪੀਨੀਅਨ ਪੁੱਛ ਲਿੱਤੀ ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਟੇਟ ਰਹਿਣੀ ਨਹੀਂ.
Yeah, what metric would we go by to say that there is support for Khalistan? We get this a lot. I'm not quite sure how to say that. Then that's one. Okay, so they've criminalized talking about a referendum. So
a non-binding referendum.
A non-binding referendum. So if there was that much support, if there wasn't any support, just why would you go to?
Seems a bit excessive.
Yeah, it seems very excessive, right? And anything that pops up, like whether it's Kisan Morcha, whether it's recently, it's Amritsar Singh coming up. What are all those people doing? They're not paid actors. What are they there for?
And there's a contradiction as well, because one side, India pushes this narrative that there is no support for Khalistan. Yeah. And on the other hand, they're absolutely terrified.
Draconian.
It reminds you of that song, that I think that Channi Nathan song, when they says, "Kende saadi movement dead ya, ter nale rakhi security Z ya." So it's kind of this weird contrast, right?
You know, academic in America literally on that exact point wrote it so beautifully and talks about on one hand they say that there's no Khalistanis and they're dead, right? Like the refusal of the martyr to be counted. They're like, so he's like, how can you count the martyr in that equation? Firstly, they don't fit into the census. He's like, on one hand they say they're dead, but on the other hand, everywhere you look is a constant. The Khalistanis are infecting the Kisan Morcha. They're coming here. They're coming from Pakistan. The guns are coming. This is happening. That's happening. Like there's this constant paranoia. They're impacting trade negotiations. People are getting killed, assassinated. It's a complete fear response. And for me, the clearest thing about this question of do people want Khalistan? Literally, our parents' generation rose up and fought an armed struggle for over 2 decades on this issue. A whole generation of Punjab, embraced one of the most difficult paths you can imagine for that question. By Gurjant Singh, Budh Singhwala writes in his letters on that point, because they were saying this at the same time. There's a massive movement that no one wants Khalistan. He's like, if no one wants Khalistan, then why is there militant Singhs everywhere? This is not just our galbat. This is the mandate that's given to us by the Panth. So I think that question is a redundant question. They people in Punjab do want Khalistan. They do want their freedom, and everywhere outside of Punjab, every diaspora country outside of Punjab where there's a strong diaspora population, UK, Canada, America, why is it that there's so much space for Khalistan? They're the same people. They're the same people that left Punjab and came here. And because over here, the government's not going to come and try to burn down your house because you're putting up a picture of a Shaheed Singh, or, you're doing a Shaheedi Smagam. They're going to try to arrest and murder your whole family. There's space here.
Yeah. What's the alternative theory? Pakistan has settled us here abroad to create with thousands of people to create a Khalistan.
Yeah, that makes
absolutely no sense.
This idea about it being a negative word, we've spoke about.
It's not a negative word.
It's not a negative word.
I would argue the complete
100%.
opposite. Yeah.
I mean, India's a negative word.
Yeah.
And
more and more so these days, people will be like, I'm not Indian, I'm Punjabi, even randoms that you wouldn't
100%.
think.
And the thing is, through this podcast series, we've spoke about lots of figures in Sikh history and lots of figures in Indian history. Whether it's Gobind Ram on their side, whether it's Sukhajan on our side. So anyone who feels that way should look into these people, and then they'll figure out the answer to themselves. Who do they think is righteous? Who said that as well?
Sardar Patel, one of the founding fathers of India, who they built the largest statue in the world to this guy.
Patel.
This guy, he says that Sikh Zaraim Pesha Qaum hai, that the Sikhs are a criminal people, a criminal tribe. So it's like this idea that Khalistan is a negative word. I think complete the opposite. Everywhere you see Khalistan, the way in which Khalistan is used is to talk about the aspirations and broaden our horizon of what we envision as our future. Khalistan's never used. The only people that use Khalistan in a negative sense are Indian nationalists who be like, you are a Khalistani, because to them that word Khalistan is tied to state violence. So they'll be like, you are a Khalistani, the implication being you should be murdered, you should be killed, you should be destroyed. So they're the ones
And
that use it.
in regards to the public support, if there wasn't the support in Punjab, then there wouldn't be Shaheed the Yadgars in Punjab.
Yeah, that's actually really, so this idea, this is fringe, right? So every single thing that we've spoke about near enough, either the Shahidi Smagam happens. So the one thing, Beyond Singh's photos are literally in Darbar Sahib. One year, Sachkhand Sri Harmandir Sahib was one of the most per person most visited places in the world. Was Sachkhand Sri Harmandir Sahib in the entire world, and there's in the Ajaibghar there's pictures of who we're talking about. What's like this idea that this is a fringe thing, or not all Sikhs want it. Literally, the photos are in the
highest,
there's no bigger honor that you could possibly get.
Have you ever been to a Gurdwara and have you ever seen a photo of Gandhi, KPS Gill, Nehru?
Forget
like-
Gurdwara, even a mandir.
Yeah.
Even they don't accept them.
It's true, but honestly, you've never seen a picture of any hero or icon of India or Indian nationalism in any Gurdwara. I've been Gurdwara all over the world. I've never seen it.
True.
Every single Gurdwara, even the smallest Gurdwara on the smallest island that I've been to, has had massive pictures of Sant Jarnail Singh. Went on a family holiday to a small island in the Mediterranean, and in that Gurdwara, the only Gurdwara on that island, huge pictures of Sukha Jinda, like akhan de vich like hanju aage, like to see the prem and the sharda that the Sangat had, man. Like, they don't speak the local Bolli there, very few of them. They've been there for a very short amount of time, and yet like there's got a bookshelf and all the Ityasik Sikh kitaban. I'm talking massive displays of like the Shaheed Singhs. I went to a Gurdwara in Barcelona, and they had like black and white, somebody had like photocopied and stuck a picture like by Anok Singh, but like I've seen it everywhere. I remember one time like there was a flood in like some Indian state like called Shillong. I had never heard of it, and United Sikhs was doing an interview with some Bibi in the Gurdwara, and like a picture of Sant Jarnail Singh. Like people never heard of this place before. But
And plus, if they think that we are so marginalized and we are a fringe element, then why did they have to send like nearly 100,000 cops to arrest Amritpal Singh? Let him speak and fizzle out. If the movement hai hi nahi, fir dar kaada hai? Fir why do you amend your constitution every third month, to nab Sikhs? Why do you sort of recognize us every single moment? Jo ye kuch bhi Sikhi ch hunda hai, they want to put their narrative. Why are they so sort of agitated by any move that we make?
Manav's explained that already, because they were Ghulam for 20,000 years.
That's exactly what it
But
is.
like the Khalistan word, I don't think it's negative. I think if you want to look into it in a more granular layer, it's a criminalized word, and there's fear associated with it. That's what's really happening here, because on the name of Khalistan, they've arrested, killed, tortured, mutilated people. So people, they know, as Sikh people know that word is criminalized, and that fear is what you see when people are talking about a negative connotation. And that is, if we let that fear survive, then we let the Indian state's violence be successful in its mission. Because the whole point of that, Sant kende hunde si Gurbani, in interpreting Gurbani, just Sikh kiya ta dar nahi, darya ta Sikh nahi. Like that fear is something that we should rid ourselves of.
Plus, I think there's one more thing. India in itself, or Hindustan, has never been one country. The only way they have actually made their people nationalist is to actually have an anti-sentiment against somebody else. For example, Pakistan or
so
Sikhs,
true.
or Khalistan or something.
That's their whole identity.
And that's how nationalism
And
operates.
that's
though.
exactly. And our nationalism,
population.
I'll guarantee you one thing, right? ਸਾਡੇ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਸਿੰਘ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਲਈ ਲੜਦੇ ਹੋਏ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੁਲਕ ਹਾਲੇ ਹੋਂਦ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ। ਐਂਡ ਇਮੈਜਿਨ ਕਰੋ ਜੇ ਉਹ ਹੋਂਦ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਵੇ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਕੀ ਹੋਏਗਾ। ਹੁਣ ਇਹਦੇ ਕੰਪੈਰੀਜ਼ਨ 'ਚ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਗਿਣਾ ਕੇ ਦੱਸ ਦਿੰਦਾ, ਸ਼ਿਵ ਸੈਨਾ ਵਾਲਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛ ਲਓ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛ ਲਓ ਕਿ ਬਾਰਡਰ 'ਤੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਲੜੋਗੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨਾਲ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਪਜਾਮੇ ਲਿਬੜ ਜਾਣੇ ਸੀਰੀਅਸਲੀ। ਕੋਜ਼ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲਿਜ਼ਮ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਇੱਕ ਮਿਥ ਸਟੇਟ ਹੈ ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਡੰਡੇ ਦੇ ਜ਼ੋਰ 'ਤੇ ਇਕੱਠਾ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਹੋਇਆ। ਐਂਡ ਇੱਕ ਸਾਡੀ ਸਟੇਟ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹਾਲੇ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ, ਪਰ ਲੱਖਾਂ ਲੋਕ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀਆਂ ਦੇਣ ਲਈ ਤਿਆਰ ਨੇ। ਮੈਂ ਇੱਕ ਛੋਟੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਉਹਦੇ ਤੋਂ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲ ਲੈਣਾ। ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਇੱਕ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਸਾਖੀ ਭੁੱਲਦੀ ਹੈ ਥੋੜੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਬੰਦੂਕ ਟੈਸਟ ਕਰਨੀ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਸਿੰਘ ਆਪਸ 'ਚ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਭਾਈ ਡੱਲਾ ਜੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਤੇ ਸਿੰਘ ਆਪਸ 'ਚ ਲੜਦੇ ਪਏ ਨਹੀਂ ਮੈਂ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋਣਾ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਵੈਲਿਡ ਹੈ ਜਦੋਂ ਬੇਅੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੂੰ ਗੱਡੀ ਚਾੜਨਾ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਦੋਵਾਂ 'ਚ ਆਪਸ 'ਚ ਲੜਾਈ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਦਿਲਾਵਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਮੈਂ ਜਾਣਾ ਅੱਗੇ ਰਾਜੋਆਣਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਮੈਂ ਜਾਣਾ ਅੱਗੇ ਇਹ ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੰਨਾ ਜਜ਼ਬਾ ਪਤਾ ਹੈ ਮੈਂ ਮਰ ਜਾਣਾ ਖਤਮ ਆ ਮੈਂ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਫੇਮ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਨਾ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਮਾਈਂਡ ਰੱਖਣੀ ਪੈਣੀ ਹੈ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਉਹ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਜਿਉਂਦਿਆਂ 'ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਜਿਉਂਦਿਆਂ 'ਚ ਵੀ ਯਾਰ ਅਨਨੋਨ ਬੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਔਰ ਸ਼ਹੀਦਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੂਜਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਲਾਈਮਲਾਈਟ ਆਪਣੇ ਹੁੰਦਿਆਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਖੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲੀ ਹੈ ਸੋ ਇਮੈਜਿਨ ਕਿ ਕੁਛ ਨਾ ਮਿਲਣ ਦੇ ਬਦਲੇ 'ਚ ਆਪਣੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਦੇਣ ਨੂੰ ਤਿਆਰ ਨੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਦੇਣ ਨੂੰ ਤਿਆਰ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦਾ ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲਿਜ਼ਮ ਐਂਡ ਦੈਟਸ ਵਾਈ ਦੇ ਫੇਅਰ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਐਂਡ ਤਾਈਓ ਇੰਨੇ ਰਿਸੋਰਸਿਸ ਲੱਗੇ ਹੋਏ ਆ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਡੀਫੇਮ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਸਤੇ
Just to wrap up that actually question, because the hypocrisy of the narrative, the government narrative is hilarious. One is to demonize Khalistanis. The other one is to show there's no support. So recently, I think they've been on a campaign in Canada. There's obviously some Punjabis there involved in gangs and drugs and that kind of culture. So some of the Punjabis that have settled there. So every single time something happens, a piece of violence, they say कि देखो खालिस्तान ने आ किया in Canada, right? Dekho Khalistan ne ek kita. This guy went to a referendum, for example, and there's been a shootout. Both narratives can't be true. Either this shows that we're so not fringe that even the criminal entities within Sikhs, even the drug dealers in Punjabi drug dealers are Khalistani, meaning this is absolutely not fringe. Do you know what I mean? Or actually there's no Khalistanis and it's just, you know, they can't, they're trying to run both of these stories at the same time. They're at loggerheads with each other.
And I think
we've answered that question.
And
we've murdered that question.
I think what they have done is basically, you know, ਜਿੰਨਾ ਇਹ ਹੁਣ demonize ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਨਾ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਨੂੰ, it's actually free publicity for us. Trust me. ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦਾ ਨਾ ਇੱਕ sentiment ਹੈ, ਉਹ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਬਹਾਵ ਤੋਂ ਉਲਟਾ ਚੱਲਦਾ। ਜਿੰਨਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਬਦਨਾਮ ਕਰੋਗੇ ਜਾਂ ਲੋਕਾਂ 'ਚ ਡਰ ਪਾਉਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰੋਗੇ ਉਹਦਾ ਰਿਫਲੈਕਸ ਐਕਸ਼ਨ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਉਲਟਾ ਹੋਏਗਾ ਇਹ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਤਰਤੀਬ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਯੂ ਨੋ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਿਕੰਦਰ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਸੀ ਮੈਂ ਸਾਰੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਜਿੱਤ ਲਈ ਉਹ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਪੋਰਸ ਹੀ ਬੈਠਾ ਸੀ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਕੀਤਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਹਰਾ ਕੇ ਬਿਮਾਰ ਕਰਕੇ ਭੇਜਦਾ ਮਰ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਸੋ ਕਹਿਣ ਤੋਂ ਭਾਵ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਸ਼ਬਦਾਂ 'ਚ ਹੀ ਐਡਾ ਐਮਫੈਸਿਸ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਇੱਕ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੇ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡੇ ਮਹਾਰਾਜੇ ਨੂੰ ਜਫਰਨਾਮਾ ਢਾਹ ਕੇ ਖਤਮ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਸ਼ਬਦਾਂ 'ਚ ਏਡੀ ਤਾਕਤ ਹੈ ਐਂਡ ਦੈਟਸ ਵਾਟ ਦੇ ਫੇਅਰ
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ and just to link on to that, it's two questions, but just to it links to this as well in terms of the 1986 Sarbat Khalsa that we spoke about in part 4. That also mentions Khalistan, right? What was that about? And then we can go into a bit more about the question itself. So I'm guessing in 1986 the Pantha declared Khalistan, right?
Yeah, in April 1986 the Khalistan Nama formally happened, and the January 1986 Sarbat Khalsa was there to formally put the demands of the Sikh Qawm in front of the world, and they made their declaration and they formed Panthic committees, and you know they gave the Jummewari into different Jajaru Jathebandiya. So April 1986 is the declaration. 29th of April is Khalistan Day essentially.
And the question leads on to say that if the 1986 Sarbat Khalsa dissolved the SGPC, then why do Sikh organizations still recognize them, including prominent Khalistan organizations?
It's I think, you know, the SGPC, because it's been given like unparalleled support by the Indian state, and the purpose of the Indian state's violence was to return the status quo. So you had the Akali Dal and the SGPC, you have to function underneath the Indian system. So I think Sikhs that support or talk about the SGPC, I think it's ekta majburiya, it's a restriction and a condition of the time. The other is, I think people see it as a tactical move. It's a, you know, kind of a, you know,
long game.
Yeah, a long game where we have to kind of do this. And, you know, the SGPC, dissolving the SGPC as well was a really important declaration, because the SGPC functions underneath the authority of the Indian Constitution. And I think, you know, again, it talks about that psyche question. Like, liberation and Khalistan and struggle is much bigger than trying to reform an institution like the SGPC. So you constantly, like, the Sikh MP and like Sant Jarnail Singh don't exist in the same plane. In the same way, the SGPC and the Akali Dal don't exist in the same realm as, you know, Jajaru Jathebandiya. They're not the same thing, essentially, but it's easier, to, you know, like certain tactical decisions are easier, and having SGPC as a semi-functioning body, I think it gives Sikhs some kind of space, the same way we have, like, you know, discourse around like referendum, voting, participation in democracy, etc., as a tactical thing, but it's not the same as Jajaru
I
Jathebandiya.
think the other side of the SGPCs, we did have parallel Akaal Tak Jathedars and other Tak Jathedars, so that ran parallel in the Sangharsh. So it's when Ranjit Singh comes out of jail, that then by Jaspreet Singh Rode relinquishes his Jathedari as well. So then everyone accepts Ranjit Singh as the Akaal Tak Jathedar. Then the SGPC sort of unanimously agreed, and since then there's not really been a challenge. Obviously we had the Sarbat Khalsa recently,
2015.
but really that fizzled out as well. So we sort of accept the system because we work with that system as well. So it's it's not like a prior thing, but obviously until your strength's strong enough, like Shamsher Singh said, the truth is the SGPC is under still the statute of Indian laws as well. So that's the problematic thing. So the SGPC does the best that it can within the system that it works.
Well, the next question was talking about the 2015 Sarbat Khalsa, and why do some people not recognize that as an actual Sarbat Khalsa?
I think ਜਦੋਂ 2015 ਦਾ ਸਰਬੱਤ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਹੈ, you know, the conditions that there was prevalent at that time was ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਸੌਦੇ ਸਾਧ ਨੂੰ ਬਿਨਾਂ ਮੰਗਿਆ ਮਾਫੀ ਦੇ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ ਤੋਂ, and that was to under political pressure from ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ, and ਇਹ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਇੱਕ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ is the one who has the majority in the SGPC house. They have 70-80% of the control of Akali Dal, of the SGPC. And mind one thing, you know, SGPC is basically a management committee for the Gurdwara. It does not, it's basic, it does not necessarily represents the Sikh nation, especially when we are spread around 7 different continents. ਗੱਲ ਸੱਚ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇੱਕ ਡਿਮਾਰਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਰਲ ਮਿਲ ਕੇ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਔਰ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਦਾ ਕੰਟਰੋਲ SGPC ਉੱਤੇ, ਫਿਰ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਇੱਕ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਦਾ ਕੰਟਰੋਲ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਇਜ਼ ਵੈਰੀ ਕੰਪਲੀਕੇਟਡ, ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਫॉर ਬਾਹਰ ਬੈਠੇ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਾਂ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਬਾਰੇ ਪਤਾ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਭ ਪਤਾ ਵੀ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਨੂੰ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਡਾਇਲਿਊਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਸੈਂਟਰ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਬਾਦਲ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਨੂੰ ਇੰਪਾਵਰ ਕਰਕੇ, ਅਤੇ ਜਾਂ ਹੁਣ SGPC ਨੂੰ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਚਲਾਇਆ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਇਨਡਾਇਰੈਕਟਲੀ, ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਹੁਣ ਜਦੋਂ ਸੌਦੇ ਸਾਧ ਦੀ ਮਾਫੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਐਂਡ ਦੈਨ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ 'ਚ ਰੋਹ ਵੱਧਦਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ 2015-26 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਖੱਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਰਬੱਤ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ, ਬਟ ਅਗੇਨ ਉਹ ਸਰਬੱਤ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਕੁਛ ਇੱਕ ਗਰੁੱਪ ਹੀ ਪਾਰਟੀਸਪੇਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਕੁਛ ਇੱਕ ਪੰਥ ਦੇ ਗਰੁੱਪ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਾਰਟੀਸਪੇਟ ਕਰਦੇ। ਫਿਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਥੇਦਾਰ ਬਣਾਇਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ 'ਚੋਂ 3 ਹੌਲੀ ਹੌਲੀ ਟੁੱਟ ਕੇ ਘਰ ਬਹਿ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਜੇਲ੍ਹ 'ਚ ਬੈਠਾ ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਜਥੇਦਾਰ ਹਾਲੇ ਵੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਸਟੈਂਡਿੰਗ ਔਨ ਦ ਗਰਾਊਂਡ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਹਾਲੇ ਵੀ ਰੈਜ਼ਿਸਟੈਂਸ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਬੈਠਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਆਪਣੀ, ਪਰ ਉਹਦੀ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਕਿ ਉਹਦਾ ਐਂਬਿਟ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਲਿਮਿਟਡ ਹੈ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹ ਜੇਲ੍ਹ ਦੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਨੇ। ਸੋ ਪਰ ਕੌਮ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੌਮ ਵਜੋਂ ਦੇਖਣਾ ਹੋਵੇ ਤੇ ਕੌਮ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਰਿਜੈਕਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇੰਡੀਅਨ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਅਧੀਨ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਚਾਹੇ ਉਹ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਦੀ ਕਪੈਸਿਟੀ 'ਚ ਹੋਵੇ, ਚਾਹੇ ਉਹ SGPC ਦੀ ਕਪੈਸਿਟੀ 'ਚ ਹੋਵੇ, ਤਾਈਓ ਸਰਬੱਤ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਤੇ ਲੱਖਾਂ ਦਾ ਇਕੱਠ ਹੁੰਦਾ। ਔਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡੀ ਵੇਖਣ ਵਾਲੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਸਰਬੱਤ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਜੇ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਜਾਵੇ ਕਿ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਸਕਸੈਸ ਕਰਾਉਣ ਲਈ ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ ਦਾ ਜਥੇਦਾਰ ਬਣਾਇਆ ਗਿਆ, ਜਥੇਦਾਰ ਜਗਤਾਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਹਵਾਰਾ ਨੂੰ, ਜਿਹਨੇ ਕਿ ਬੇਅੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਅਸੈਸੀਨੇਸ਼ਨ ਪਲਾਨ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ, ਉਹਦੇ 'ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਰਿਐਕਸ਼ਨ ਸੀ ਕਰਾਊਡ ਦਾ, ਉਹ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸ ਦਿੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਕਰਾਊਡ ਮੂਵਮੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੈ ਜਾਂ ਇਹ ਮਿਲਵਰਤਨੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੈ। ਕਰਾਊਡ ਸਦਾ ਹੀ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਵਾਲੇ ਪਾਸੇ ਰਿਹਾ, ਸੰਗਤ ਨੇ ਸਦਾ ਹੀ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੋੜਤਾ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ। ਔਰ 2015 ਦੇ ਸਰਬੱਤ ਖਾਲਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਜੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਮਤਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੜ੍ਹਿਆ ਜਾਏ ਤੇ 1986 ਦੇ ਸਰਬੱਤ ਖਾਲਸੇ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੋੜਤਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਸੋ ਇਟਸ ਲਾਈਕ ਅ ਬਿਲਡ ਅਪ ਫਰਮ ਦੈਟ। ਪਰ ਹੁਣ ਰਿਐਲਿਟੀ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਉੱਥੇ ਦਾ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਇਜ਼ ਕੰਟਰੋਲਡ ਬਾਏ ਦੀ ਇੰਡੀਅਨ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ। ਉਹ ਚਾਹੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ SGPC ਲੈ ਲਓ ਜਾਂ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਲੈ ਲਓ ਜਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਹੋਰ ਲੈ ਲਓ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਹਦੂਦ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਫੰਕਸ਼ਨ ਕਰੇਗੀ ਉਹ ਇਵੈਂਚੁਅਲੀ ਕਰਪਟ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ।
ਐਂਡ ਜਸਟ ਟੂ ਬੈਲੈਂਸ ਦੈਟ, ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਸਮਟਾਈਮਸ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਵੀ ਪੰਥਕ ਭਾਵਨਾਵਾਂ are where they are in their jazz where they are. However, ਕਈ ਲੋਕ ਕਈ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਉਹੀ ਫੀਲਿੰਗਾਂ ਦਾ ਉਹ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਆ, right? So it's there has become a mistrust, to be completely there's become a mistrust by ਕਹਿ ਲਓ like hardened ਪੰਥਕ look, that have seen like the coming and going of this, whether it's a morcha for what was a very legitimate cause, Bargadi morcha for the Beadbi of Guru Granth Sahib Ji, and then that becomes something else. It becomes a political footballing tool for one party to get in, and then it's propped up by somebody else. So there's always this element out as well amongst Sikhs, just to balance the argument. There's no shock that, of course, any gathering that supports honouring our shaheeds or the things that are in prison on those lines is very positive. But we can't ignore the fact that there is this kind of mistrust about, like, kivi ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਪੰਥਕ ਨੂੰ ਪੰਥਕ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਪੰਥਕ ਸੋਚ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਹਨੇ ਹਾਈਜੈਕ ਕਰਕੇ ਬੈਠੇ ਆ, right? And then whenever they want to just delay it, they'll just delay it. It always seems like there's always a ready, just before elections, just to do over one party in particular. Could it be backed by the others? Actually, when they come in, actually, we're guys, pack your stuff up, we're gone. So like, I know I might be talking a lot into this, but there seems to be almost like a pre-baked plan to go to the next one, hence like ground level mistrust as well.
With the Bargadi Morcha at that time, there was like tens of thousands of Sikhs in Punjab that came to the streets over that issue of Guru Sahib's Biadbi, right? And every time you see like a morcha on Guru Sahib's Biadbi or like a Panthik Masala, people come out because there's this overwhelming feeling that's under the surface that erupts in those moments. And every single time, like Paisa saying, is that that feeling is then somehow channelized into, again, these like convoluted questions of justice from like the Indian system, and they take those Panthik Bhavnama and those Panthik aspirations and they fit them into political electioneering issues of the time. They're always misguided and misused. Like the 86 Sarbat Khalsa, right? This is one of the quotes from it. And they said, this congregation proclaims for the information of the whole world that the Khalsa who wishes the welfare of all, obviously it's a translation, never attacks the poor and oppressed. The present Sikh struggle is directed against those plundering and destructive raiders who have assaulted our principles, Gurdwara, Guru Granth Sahib, our form, dress, bana, our kirt kamai, our truthful earnings. The Khalsa Panth will always support the struggle of those institutions that follow the principle of equality, doing labour and sharing their products while reciting Naam. The Assembly of Sarbat Khalsa strongly endorses armed struggles of the peoples of the world, especially those in India who are fighting against the tyrant colonial rule for their rights and independence. So that the 86 Sarbat Khalsa doesn't emerge, like we talked in the previous episode, from a vacuum. There's a build-up. There's there's groundwork that happens to get it to that point. And what the analysis of like Sikhs in Punjab has been regarding Sarbat Khalsa is that we need to figure out and deliberate on how to actually effectively have a Gurmata again, because that process has been interrupted and destroyed. So there's certain, a Sarbat Khalsa happens in a certain way. Sikhs are within themselves, like the Khalsa chooses their namende, like Paisa was talking about, like this minority rule idea, right? From within those, the Sangat that's gathered, the namende are chosen, and they're chosen for their kamai and their like jivan and like how they live as Sikhs. And then the Sangat's given an opportunity to raise a question on any of the individuals selected. And then those selected individuals, I'm giving like a short version, they then will carry out that role of listening to all of the suggestions and all of the inputs that are given, and then deliberating on all of them and presenting a decision. And there has to be a process to get to that point. So in 2015, you see like the Sarbat Khalsa, even though I 100% agree with Paisa and like the emotion and the eruption of the Sangat in support of an imprisoned like militant guerrilla commander, to elect him to the position of like Akaal Takhat Jathedar is a massive statement in and of itself. But at that time, it became kind of like a roadshow almost, where everyone wanted to get on the stage and like have their little say and have put their kind of 2 pence in, and then it didn't really go forward because that's the institutions and the infrastructure wasn't there. And that's what needs to be developed in order to have the Sarbat Khalsa. It needs to happen according to our Gurmat principles, not any other kind of considerations. I don't think it's like a question of like, do people recognize it or not? I think Panthik Sikhs do recognize it. They recognize the feeling and the emotion that was behind it, and they also have an analysis and a critique of it, of wanting this process to be revived, wanting it to be better, wanting actually to see that type of leadership in those positions of power again.
Next question. Why did Sikhs rebuild Akaal Takht Sahib?
So following the Battle of Amritsar, very quickly the government wanted to have a complete whitewash of what happened, the scale of the violence, the scale of the destruction of the Parkarma, the nearby buildings, the Akaal Takht, of course. It was fully under military occupation. So within that whole period that the government was in occupation of the Darbar Sahib complex, there's only about 3 or 4 pictures that ever emerge, and even those were taken in a clandestine manner by the photographers around Darbar Sahib. The government wanted the Akaal Takht to be rebuilt straight away, because what the Bhavanama of the Sangat was at the time was to keep it as a memorial, intact with the gaping holes, as a reminder to the future Qawm, to the future generations, that this is our conditions of Galami and how we need our own Azad home. And that was obviously terrifying for the government, because they didn't want any of this to be ever leaked out. So they started to try and find Sikh Sants, Babbe, Kar Seva Wale Babbe, anyone that would take on rebuilding the Akaal Takht. And the problem they had was every single Kar Seva Babba or other Sikh Sants and Sansta, they all refused, point blank. And the main reason they refused was because the one condition that they had, the main condition they had with the government, was that it couldn't be rebuilt under occupation. So it couldn't be done under one of the sons said it couldn't be done under the shadows of guns of the army that inflicted that damage, and obviously definitely not with the money of the Indian state. Then the government of India, through Bhutta Singh, who was a union minister, approached Baba Santa Singh, the Bhutta Dal Jathadar, and he agreed to rebuild the Akaal Takht. However, although the narrative has been that the Bhutta Dal Baba Santa Singh rebuilt the Akaal Takht with the government's money, the truth is, on the 16th of July, he was escorted under heavy guard and met at Amritsar by the members of Parliament, Casey Pant, whatever his name is. Okay. He was met, on the 16th of July, Baba Santa Singh was escorted under heavy armed guard and met at Amritsar by members of Parliament, including Aran Nehru. And there is a book that was published by the District Magistrate of Amritsar, Ramesh Inder, who was the administrative lead on this project. And at that time, there was a curfew that no more than 5 Sikhs could congregate. And during that time, they had given a pardon for this process. And Baba Santa Singh was brought in, and the masonry work was formally commenced by Baba Santa Singh on the 1st of August by laying 2 bricks. But that was as far as his involvement was. So he was used essentially to rubber stamp, to add a seal of credibility to what the government was doing. They wanted to show that it was the Sikhs themselves had rebuilt the Akaal Takht, and in record time as well. They wanted to do it really, really quickly. There was absolutely no question that the Buddha Dal had either the resources or the skill to rebuild the Akaal Takht in the time scale that it was done. So the rebuilding starts from the 1st of August and completes by the 30th of September. And the only reason that on the 30th of September that the Akaal Takht and the Darbar Sahib complex is given back to the SGPC essentially is because Jathe of Bibia were going to court arrest every day. And under that pressure, they had to hand over the keys to the Darbar Sahib. The key important thing to remember about this rebuilding is that the government used 2 agencies, including the National Buildings Constructions Corporation and the Central Public Works Department, who were in charge of major construction in the state, in Punjab, and the central government, so buildings, roads, huge corporations essentially, and government contractors were used to rebuild. So it was a huge task force that was introduced in terms of government agencies, contractors, to get this done in record time. They imported chemicals from Europe to try and inject into the cracks to rebuild that. The gold work for the domes was done during the night. So everything was done undercover essentially. And the reason why this was not acceptable to the Sikh was because this was done under occupation and it was done by the Indian state. Because at this point, Operation Woodrose is in full effect. This is just a few months after the Battle of Amritsar. So we've got tens of thousands of Sikh Naujawan from the ages of 15 to 50 across Punjab who are being hunted by the military, and there's still children in detention. And whilst this is all happening, the Sangat can't actually go to Darbar Sahib. They can't, it's out of bounds. So it's in that mahal, in that context, that it was rebuilt by the government, and there's the same government that inflicted that damage, right? That shaheed thousands of Sikhs. So that's why it was completely not acceptable.
But I think the other side of it is the Sarkar thought that the Sikhs that we wanted to kill in Darbar Sahib or in the 62 other Gurdwara across Punjab, we've killed those. And the main Sikhs of the Sangharsh, the Jodhpur detainees, they're in jail. So if we now replaster the Akaal Takht Sahib, rebuild it, we can go back to normality. Even though the Jodhpur detainees come out in 88, 89, they didn't realise that the roast from the Sangat and the Qawm was going to be so much that they still wouldn't accept this, even though they got Panthak Jathabandiya, Baba Santa saying, there's a Sant from Nanaksar, Baba Narayana saying, they got the Namtaris there as well. There was even another Nihang Jathabandi Jathadar there. So even though they got certain Sikhs to placate the situation to an extent,
At the Sarkar Khalsa.
in the August gathering that they had, but the roast in the Sangat was so much that the state destroyed our Takht, destroyed our Gurdwara, and now they placate it with plaster, and then you think we're going to accept over our dead bodies. We won't accept it. So the rejection was still there. All it was, it took another year or so for them to then implement that. So that roast, even though it's 1986, it's still that hot in their minds. It's 18 months later.
Wasn't that part of the Sarbat Khalsa as well in 86 where they denounced the rebuilding?
Yeah, they said that this Kar Seva should happen with the Kirt Kamai of the Sangat and with the hands of the Sangat. That's the tradition in how it should happen. And that's what they had an issue with the construction of Akaal Takht, because it was carried out, like Baljit Singh said, through government contractors that were brought in, specially government labourers, to complete it within record time. And the Sangat wanted to do it themselves. And when the Sangat did do it themselves, after the Akaal Takht that was constructed was demolished, it took years for its completion.
They knocked it down again.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the other side of it is the Akaal Takht was never really demolished in any of this. So the real Thara, the Maharaj built, that never got destroyed. So even though there's a government narrative to say when the Senghs destroyed the building, they destroyed the Thara remained. So we got Baitanna Singh now on record saying he's the guy who pulled the gun out on the Kar Seva Babbe when they're about to try knocking that down. So the Thara from Maharaj never went, the real original building. And even through the glass we can see those Nanak Shahidna. So that remains. And even the Thara of the Takht Sahib. So the Takht also moved to Kirtpur Sahib, which we conveniently forget. So Sheme Pasha leaves Amritsar and takes the Takht to Kirtpur Sahib, and there's a Takht Sahib there. So the Takht can move as well. So we're really like ideologically placed on because of our Darbar Sahib, but the Takht actually moved in Sheme Pasha's time. So that's proven in our ideology that the Takht can be wherever the Panth is. So even the Buddha da ideology ke panjwa Takht hai, ashi chalda vi hirja tha. Takht tha ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਮਰਜੀ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ. So it's not even restricted to that, but the Indian government were placating, but they didn't realise that our system is so outside of that as well, because we're completely sovereign.
And if you go to Darbar Sahib today, and you'll see all around Darbar Sahib and Akaal Takht these marble plaques essentially in the walls from various different Indian army regiments, because they want to be the invaders but also the saviors at the same time as well. They've been continually pushing this narrative, like Gill said, the General Brar says that we went into the temple with prayers on our lips and humility in our hearts essentially. So they have this weird kind of fetish role that they try to fulfill, that they're saving us from ourselves. So that was the whole point of their involvement in that construction. You can talk about like maybe it's like their sense of guilt, but also more importantly, like Baljit Singh was saying, it is about denying us that memorial, I think that was like quite a revolutionary statement for them to make initially, that they want to preserve the Akaal Takht in its demolished form, and in rushing its construction, it took something away from us, I think.
It was part of that same government misinformation campaign where they was to get Gyani Kirbal Singh to stand in front and saying that there's been very little damage, or that what did he say was Tosha Kana Tika. And same part of this campaign is them making documentaries using helicopters and sending them out across the world and trying to push this image that nothing happened, it wasn't that bad. It's just that's the same thing they were doing to the Sikh army, right? The Sikh soldiers in the army, they were being told the same thing. They were playing on the radio that everything is fine. So it was just trying to like a massive cover up to not show, like, because it was when the Sangat saw, it's the Sangat that were able to see Akaal Takht, that had a massive impact on them.
So when was Akaal Takht Sahib fully rebuilt. and then
97, I
after
think
that-
it
I
was.
think it's 97.
So that's the difference as well. I mean, because
That's
some
the other Carter.
because some people will say that that Buddha Dal has a huge amounts of resources, lots of guru cars, and they were able to do this. But the truth is, when the Sangat did the Kar Seva with our own hands, it took nearly 11 years, and the government were able to turn that around within 3 months.
And that wasn't just a Kartak side. What about the?
Yeah, that's true. That's right.
What about the Parkarama, like the bullets, holes, and
They had to,
what happened
that
there?
include in that period of time they had to rebuild like the Parkarama because the tank crushed all the stairs, all the adjoining buildings, all the saran, all the rooms that were gutted because they threw grenades in each room. So there was a huge amount of work to be done, and it showed how much they were terrified that if the Sangat were to, because this is the Sangat were marching upon Darbar Sahib to see and to save the complex. So that's what they were desperately trying to hide from them.
It's a bit of a side question. I actually met Jarnail Singh about 5-6 years ago, and he mentioned his story of how he was there doing Kar Seva, Kartak Sahib, and he said that him and other individuals are still picked up, and they were tortured. So even though Sikhs are now rebuilding Kartak Sahib, that didn't mean that they were still persecuted and they were still.
The government would have seen that as a challenge to them, right?
Yeah.
Because we were having to rebuild it and to tear down the Akaal Takht that the government built, which the Sikhs at the time called the Sarkar Takht, didn't it?
Sarkar, yeah.
And the other thing is there is some conversation about the frescoes as well. Some people say they'll show pictures of Singhs breaking the frescoes, the old paintings that were on the damaged original Takht. And it just reminds me of something that Sant Jarnail Singh Ji said at the time when a Sikh had his beard cut and tamaku spat in his mouth. And Sant Ji goes, it's better that if every Sikh dies than to live like this. He goes, it's better. So these things don't mean anything in terms of buildings. Like the Akaal Takht is the immortal throne. But if we don't have our Sikhi, we don't have our sovereignty, we don't have our Siddhant, then what is there's just buildings and bricks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, because we mentioned in the podcast, but we didn't get to go into much detail about that. So thank you for covering that. Good. Just last few questions. These are now from the YouTube comments from our last previous videos, as well. So these are questions that are challenging some of the stuff that we spoke about in the previous podcasts. They're quite long, so I'm only going to read out the main essence of what they're saying. The first one is, you guys make all political issues so religion-centric. The truth is the Punjab crisis has its roots in global capitalism, destroying the Indian food supply, and so on. But any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, they're right. Like, the Punjab's crisis and Indian neoliberalism, capitalism it's tied to that. It's creating those types of conditions that are producing monocrop culture, exploiting the land, etc., etc. But our economic model comes from our dharam. Like this idea of our religion and politics are two separate things doesn't exist, because Sikhs have a unique worldview. So we don't view ourselves as a religion or as a political entity. As ek panth hain, and the theories and the sciences and the ideas on how we want to create an economic system, a political system, etc., is obviously going to be influenced and guided by Gurmat and Sikhi, because that's what teaches us how to be what we are. Like, you can't find a definition of yourself without the Guru Granth Sahib, then that's just ego, innit?
And I think there are two aspects to it. The one aspect is the Sikh versus Indian state, and the other aspect is Punjab versus India. So they both go hand in hand. They want to destroy you and they want to destroy your home. There's two separate things. So if the persecution is happening in the name of religion, then you can't discount religion from it. Je hun tusi Jews de Holocaust cho Jews kad deo, then what are we left with? If it is happening in the name of religion and in the name of Sikhi, your separate entity, as we've mentioned this before, is your Nyarapan, is the biggest hindrance in their one nation theory. So you will be on the target. So we have to talk from a Sikh perspective. And yes, we talk about from the Punjab perspective as well, how they've destroyed our economy, how they've plundered our resources, how they have destabilized the whole the whole area and everything. So there are two aspects which are
the comments right grieving revolution and all these things, they're not necessarily Sikh issues by default. However, I think jidan we are ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿ ਗੁਰੂਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਂ ਤੇ ਵਸਦਾ ਪੰਜਾਬ, that Sikhs will always resist it. Hence why it will always be a Sikh issue. So any Punjab's issues will become a Sikh issue by default.
I think the other side of it is any political theory, political system has a philosophy behind it, some ideals, some values. And so we always think we go against the Sikh philosophy, which is our ideology for our political system. So there's a building in London where prime ministers of the UK would go to drink alcohol and write their speeches and then go to Parliament. But it's got a painting of, I don't know if it's Maharaja Dalip Singh or Maharaja Ranjit Singh. It's called Liberal Society. So that Ravinder Singh, Rav Singh, who does the history of the Sikhs in London, he actually got access to the building and stuff. So, but a lot of the political thought for the UK was created on the basis of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's Raj. So we always look outside and look across to someone else. But our Raj actually created these systems in their Sochni as well, of how a polity should be played.
Good. Great answers. This is another question. Clearly, they didn't watch the previous podcasts, as you'll learn from the question. All full of lies and made up nonsense in this video. How are Sikhs second-class citizens in India? Sikhs in India have been PM, President, Head of Raw Army. Sikhs educated in India have gone on to become heads of World Bank and CEOs of tech companies. Is that second-class citizenship?
Let me guess the nationality of this commenter.
Yeah.
I have a feeling they're
we
commenting
already-
from the Republic of India.
Yeah,
Well,
we already said
name's
president.
Dave, so I don't know.
Yeah, well,
It might be
Definitely.
a fake name. I don't know.
Yeah.
Definitely from India.
Dave.
yeah.
But you know the thing is, I would argue that, I mean, they're right in the sense of, they're saying that Sikhs, how are Sikhs second-class citizens? That the people they described are Indian citizens, and as an Indian citizen, you can be an equal, you can be the prime minister, whatever. But when they're targeting Sikhs, then like Zail Singh, they're
when
going
we gave
to
the
cut your
example of
phone
Zell,
line
yeah.
and they're going to target you. Yeah.
I don't know whose quote it is, but I can't remember where I read it or where I've seen it. None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. Basically, that's why. So be a CEO doesn't mean anything.
I think to get the answer to these questions, they will have to, watch all the 4 podcasts. They will get the answer automatically.
But even it's very clear that you can reach these positions. You can be the prime minister. You can be a super cop like KPS Gill, be used against your community and be celebrated. But the thing is, that's very different from existing in the form of the Azad Khalsa. And then when that conflict reaches that pitch, then it doesn't matter what kind of Sikh you think you are going to be treated just like any other Sikh, just like you saw in the Asian Games where there was a restriction on Sikhs attending, just like you see in Zail Singh, the so-called president of so-called India, having his phone lines cut, having his car stoned by his fellow Indian citizen. Those same military and those same guns will turn against you when you question the sovereignty of the Indian state. So as long as you accept that you're the sovereignty of the Indian state and you want to be a loyal, productive citizen for India, then of course you can become the prime minister.
And the best thing with Zal Singh's story is he tells the truth in death, in his memoirs.
He couldn't even say it.
He couldn't say it while he was alive. So he tells the truth that the June 84 attack, they opened fire without giving any...
The reality with Zail Singh as well, he was a president of India, so he's the head of the armed forces, and he had no clue about the battle.
Yeah.
So it shows you what real position he has.
Right, cool. Thanks for answering that. And I think definitely, as Spice I've said, you've got 12 hours of content to watch, and you should get all your answers from there as well. Okay, so the next question that we have here is, I'm not a pro-Khalistan supporter. What would a tiny Khalistan nation situated between 3 nuclear powers, India, Pakistan and China, achieve? Instead, shouldn't we focus on transforming the Indian government into one that prioritizes human rights and the well-being of all its citizens?
They've banned human rights groups. So that's pretty...
Did they kick Amnesty out, or have they raided Amnesty's offices and kicked them out of India?
I think what a tiny Khalistan nation will achieve, the answer to that is harmony. In that whole destabilized South Asian, quarter, I think having a buffer state is immensely important. First thing is, talking about a geopolitical, from a geopolitical aspect. The second thing, when he says ki India nu convince karo ki yo better de dewe, hai na? We've already answered that question in the last podcast, is what good we will get in terms of giving therapy to Hitler, to say कि Jews nu na maar ਜਾਂ ਫਲਾਣੇ ਨੂੰ na maar. There's no
But,
point.
you know,
We
the
won't get
question
any
is,
good out of it.
the question is about reform, right? Like, can the Indian state structure be reformed? And if you look at like the Sikh political landscape with Khalistan, the referendum is a reformist approach to the question of Sikh liberation. And the referendum doesn't endorse armed struggle. The referendum wants to respects international order, the United Nations, and wants to have a non-binding referendum on the question of Khalistan. India has termed that a terrorist group. And they've criminalized the referendum.
And try to assassinate whatever it's made
try
out
to
of.
assassinate, it's like legal advocate in America and got caught in the process. But that should answer the question of like, if India had the potential for reform, then it would engage like any other so-called democratic country, like UK and Scotland have a question of like succession and independence. But UK isn't committing genocide against and criminalizing Scottish independence advocates. So I think that question of like Indian reform has long sailed. India, I personally believe, as an entity cannot be reformed. The Indian state structure should be abolished in its entirety. And Pakistan, India and China, those borders are constantly shifting. And like I said before, I don't think they survive the process of the creation of Khalistan. I don't see Khalistan as a buffer state between those areas. I think it's the only entity that brings regional stability and prosperity to that entire region, because the masses of the Indian state are oppressed under the casteist ideology of Brahmanism. The vast majority of them are poor, illiterate, don't have clean drinking water or functioning toilets in this so-called a nation that has a space program. There's a massive disparity between the rich and the poor. So I don't think India as a model is surviving right now. It's on the brink of collapse, and I think like the Khalistan struggle and other independent struggles will push it over the edge. So I think that idea of like Khalistan being this tiny kind of nation that doesn't survive that process, I think the opposite is true. Like literally the idea of India, breaks upon the mention of the word Khalistan, that they have to make it a sedition arrestable offense to hand out. 3 Sikhs got life imprisonment sentences 4 years ago for handing out literature on Khalistan. Like, India is so strong and powerful that it got scared of guys handing out leaflets. Like, it's a state in a constant sense of paranoia and fear over its national integrity.
For good reason.
Yeah.
Another question here that you touched upon on the podcasts is 35,000 Hindus were killed by Bhindranwale
36.
and gang in the name of Khalistan. We Indians will never allow terrorists to rule India. We believe in the Gurus, not some wannabe Sikhs. I want to use Guru's name in spreading misinformation.
I mean, they literally elected a criminal, Modi, to their government, somebody who committed genocide in Gujarat. India has one of the highest number of criminals as sitting MPs.
Head of the house.
Yeah, and this idea of like are they upset with the numbers? Because you often hear this, right? Like 30,000 Hindus, like Indian nationals say this, like Sikhs killed 35,000 Hindus or 30,000. The number's always increasing, by the way. Like it was like 30, then it's like 35, 36, 40, whatever. But you always hear this, but I don't understand what they're upset about, because if they're upset about people dying, then shouldn't they be upset of the scale of violence that India has inflicted upon Sikhs and Kashmiris and Dalits on a regular basis? Like the continual survival of India is caste violence against Dalits. Like that's how India exists as a country. So I don't think it's a question of them being upset about this number. It is about putting this label of terrorism on Sant Jarnail Singh, and that number itself comes from the South Asian Terrorism Portal, which is founded by KPS Gill and run by one of his associates, and it's a fabricated number. That there's a report called Who Speaks for Khalistan on khalistan.org, and we completely debunked that number.
The Sarkar officially says only 30,000 people died between the years of 84 to 95. So if only 30,000 died, and that's saying 36,000 Hindus, 60% of Masjid Punjab se kya. That figure doesn't even add up. That's the first thing. Secondly, that's a bot's answer. So when you go on the internet and you go on Twitter and stuff like that, this is a quote that is repeatedly stated.
Yeah.
And so if you say something lasting terrorist, not a single FIR, not a single fact to prove he's a terrorist, because he gave a few fiery speeches, you're saying he's a terrorist, but you've got no proof. There's no smoking gun. You can't even prove that he fired a gun from Akaal Takhat. In a criminal case, you couldn't even prove that, let alone anything else. So there's nothing there to even prove that. And then if you read the books by their own police officers, like Dillon, who was the DGP in 84, and other people, the figures don't add up to that at all anyway. And there's a few sporadic incidents of people being pulled off buses and killed. But even that, a lot of our intelligence says that was
one of those
what do we call them?
The police
false,
cats, innit?
false flag.
Black cats.
sort of
False flag.
I think
false
it's
flag
even
like
one of those
incidents.
incidents with the bus killings that was used to bring in President's Rule in '83, October '83.
Yeah.
Is that Tillimo?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the reason so some of these incidents took place by the government themselves in order to either bring in their own governments. President's Rule was where they've sacked the state government, the elected government, to bring in.
And does that seem far-fetched? The Dilwa incident, in this incident, does it seem far-fetched? Operation Shanti
Mhm.
was a leaked planning of a false flag post 84, post the attack.
The other thing I remember going down a rabbit hole.
Hold
with-
on, say what that is.
Operation Shanti.
Yeah, say it for everyone.
I think this is what they were planning. They were planning, as you said, a false flag operation, that they're gonna basically cause a big scale attack on, in Punjab, and actually blame that on Sikhs. That Sikhs have actually colluded with Pakistan, and they have basically, caused something, and then they will trigger the genocide. But Indira Gandhi got killed in the meanwhile, and it just triggered it before. So they always had the plan to ethnically cleanse India by taking, the blood
Sangat
of
Singh
Sikhs.
mentions that in his book, doesn't he?
Who is this?
Sangat Singh.
Okay.
Yeah, he mentions that in his book, Operation Shanti. So he was
Operation-
part of the Indian intelligence. He was also
Okay.
he's saying he heard that as a government official
Yeah.
at the time.
Well, this links on to those questions, a previous question about mentioning Sant Ji and Indira Gandhi now as well. Please, this is a very important question. A lot of people will face this question in their own households as well. When it comes to Sant Ji and, family members for and against, and Baisad, you mentioned it on the podcast as well. Please clear up why Sant Jarnail Singh Ji is portrayed as a spy or a worker for Gandhi or like a worker for RSP or something like that. Tell us the truth. I've triggered fights in my house because of various opinions, as they think Sant Ji is a true saint, but the rest of the family are like, no, he's a terrorist, spy, or whatever.
Everyone wants a piece of him because he's the man. Everyone wants to claim him.
Do you know what?
That can't be the answer.
Do you know it's not bad though? It's not bad.
ਸਾਡਾ ਹੀ ਆ
Yeah.
ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੌੜ ਲੱਗੀ ਹੋਆ
No, do
This
you
is
know?
an important one.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the government ran an intense propaganda campaign, even before, but definitely after 1984, the Darbar Sahib attack, and they continue to try to demonize Sant Jarnail Singh, and that narrative definitely finds a foothold in the countries outside of India, because they also have that stereotype of the mindless terrorists that they've relied upon in order to, prop up their domestic political discourse. So it works well for them. But obviously it's not true. Like Sant Jarnail Singh is, revered and honored as a martyr by Sikhs, by the Akaal Takhat, honored as the greatest Sikh of the 20th century. Even during his time, Sant Jarnail Singh was viewed as the de facto leader, even though he didn't occupy the position of the Akaal Takhat Jathedar, but essentially his role fulfilled that function. There's no evidence or there's no anything that suggests Sant Jarnail Singh was a spy. I mean, that's the first time I've heard that word used, in all honesty. But yeah, I'm sure Bali can go into a lot more.
But politically, it's like
Baljeet can go into a lot more detail.
rationalization of your theory. So everyone wants to rationalize the Sant Jarnail Singh was possibly a Congress agent or this or that. But when you actually go underneath it, he was just an independent Sikh that no one could abuse and use. That's what it really comes down to. And no one could abuse his position. So he became amenable that someone made a theory that he was a Congress agent against the Akalis that suited certain people because their agenda wasn't fulfilled through him and other things.
But if he was a spy, in the history of spies, he's probably the worst spy,
He was the
Yeah.
worst one.
because he probably completely failed at
He
it. So
didn't
what was,
understand the
as a
objective.
spy, just logically, if you follow that out, if he was a spy, what was his role to get information? He ended up becoming the leader of the resistance movement and provoking a conflict
getting
with
the
the Indian state,
Prime Minister assassinated in effect as a result of all his actions.
launching a decade-long
terrible
armed
employee.
struggle. Yeah. So even as a Congress agent, it doesn't make sense. Like what he did all of this, and assumingly the Congress did this in order to make sure what they never win another election again, or they win that one election, and it constantly become like it's an extreme election campaign. Like, let's go launch a military invasion on like Darbar Sahib in order to secure like, it just doesn't pan out as any logical theory.
Just to check this in quickly with that, do you think it comes in there? And then please carry on. Do you think Indira Gandhi was trying to use Bhindranwale to win elections in Punjab in 1977? That's just if that links. With
So it's a bit of it is a complex issue with the Sant Ji and the Congress allegation. And we talked about this in the second episode of the podcast, where if you discount all of his actual itihas, which with the militant side of Sant Ji, then that theory can have legs. But if you look at, because what some of the people who believe Sant Ji was a Congress agent or was a Congress plant, when they're faced with the reality that he opposed the Congress, then they call him Frankenstein, that he was the monster that then turned against the creator. But then this is where the chronology of Sant Jarnail Singh Ji's political career causes problems, because he's a Jathedar in 77. In 78, he spearheads the campaign against the Nirankaris, which sees them completely dismantled, and the Nirankaris are a Congress creation. So they'd spend like hundreds of millions of dollars to set this whole infrastructure up, and by the 1982, that's completely eradicated from the face of Punjab. In 1980, Gurbachna, the Nirankari leader, is assassinated, and Sant Ji is involved in that. In 1981, Lala Jagannath, a Congress leader, is assassinated. Sant Ji is involved in that. In 1982, the Darbara Singh, the Chief Minister of Punjab, a Congress Chief Minister of Punjab, has like various assassination attempts. In 1982, the Tarmid Morcha is launched against the central government, which is Congress. So then at which point in his history did he turn? If he starts in 78, and that's his trajectory, at which point? Because then the only thing you can imagine is that for like a week or something, he was pro-Congress. But all of his leadership is anti-Congress, anti-central government, anti-Akalis as well. Wherever he even says is that on matters of the Taram, I'm with the Akalis, but when they stray from that, then I'm not with them. So Sant Ji and he says this very clearly, that if I've sold out to the hijackers, the motorcycle wale, they're saying I've sold out to them. But he's not sold out to anyone else.
And then he also embraces that label of terrorist as well. Yeah. Like today, that label of terrorist becomes something that, we're not terrorists, we're freedom fighters or whatever. There's that justification or the jumping through hoops. So he says, well, if a terrorist means doing all of the activity, then I am a terrorist, and I encourage you to be a terrorist and embrace this path of terrorism.
And now I've got this kind of platform to talk about this. It's something that really annoys me, because there's books written about Sant Jarnail Singh Ji that translate his speeches, and at the beginning of the book, the author will write, Sant Jarnail Singh was not involved in any of this stuff. And then the same author in the speeches will write where Sant Ji is saying, this is why Lala got shot, this is why Gurbachna got shot, and list Sant Ji accepting at the highest level that he did all these things. And the same author who's translating these speeches will at the beginning of the book say Sant Ji was innocent of any of these allegations.
It's difficult to reconcile, right? Sant Jarnail Singh as a Dharmic Aggu and a guerrilla commander essentially. But not only did Sant Jarnail Singh criticize and undermine the Congress party, he undermines the entire setup of power of the Indian state. So his critique goes way beyond the Congress party. So Sikhs realize what the nature of the Indian state is. So when the fight is not against any political party, it's not against the Congress, it's not against the BJP, it's against the authority and sovereignty of the Indian state. So like I'm saying, if he was an agent or a spy, he was the worst agent or spy that completely was bad at his job.
Yeah. Do you think people are trying to reconcile that with just kind of without? So if you take away Sikh psyche and Sikhs, it's Siddhant and resistance, if you take that out, it's just a comfortable way to reconcile the world of geopolitics.
It's a bit lazy. It's a bit disingenuous, because it's lazy, because if you read all the Byan and speeches and everything else, Sant Jarnail Singh, he never moves on his position.
Nope.
So he's not a political banda. Whatever he said, he stood by it, and he never got caught out on any interview. We're doing this podcast. We know this is going to get edited. We make stupid mistakes every few seconds, and that's between ourselves. But this guy never got caught out with a journalist. So it's like...
And the thing is, what's interesting about the Congress link is that it's something that the opposition parties use against Congress, but Congress can never... They never vehemently argue against it. Because the problem with, if he's not a Congress agent, then who is he? So this idea of he was huge, he was massive, he had this influence. So they have to kind of accept it as well, because by accepting his Congress, it means he was wrong, innit? He was dodgy, he was corrupt. But if they came out and strongly said, look, of course he wasn't one of ours, he's killing all of our guys, isn't it? Then the question is, well, if he's not their agent, then whose agent is he?
But it's ridiculous as well, because Darbara Singh, Chief Minister, and in the Sarkar go to the 82, 83, they call him President's rule, don't they?
Yeah.
So Congress actually won the elections in Punjab, ruling Punjab, suspended their own Punjab government, and who's spearheading the movement against him? Another Congress agent, Sant Jarnail Singh. So it's like you're self-imploding your whole rule yourselves.
But they have
So
to,
how
like,
would that work?
they have to kind of accept that too, though, that he is a Congress agent, because the alternative is unthinkable.
But like, you follow, like, saying the ridiculous trajectory of it. Like, they do all of this in order to launch a military assault. So Indira Gandhi wins an election, but then she gets assassinated. That she already won, but then she gets assassinated, so her son can win a landslide victory. Like, it's an extreme policy.
Long soch, innit?
Lambi soch, man. But I mean, people can accept that, obviously, completely and critically, but they can't accept, the people that believe in this theory. They can't accept that Sant Jarnail Singh would organically emerge from what, like, the long tradition of Sikh leaders organically emerging, Parupkari Yodhe, Sangat de vichcho emerging to give guidance and leadership and draw the connection between, like, Sant Jarnail Singh, Baba Deep Singh, Baba Gurbachan Singh, like, all of the, like, centuries of Sikh history. Like, we can discount and ignore all of that. That didn't create Sant Jarnail Singh, but what did was, an MP, a politician that wasn't even that great. I mean, like, Indira Gandhi is convicted of electoral fraud. Like, her lasting impact on Indian democracy is, like,
just give
destroying it.
Give an example of, like, how they had to kind of accept it. Is that when the Bombay fiasco happens for them, where Sant Ji evades arrest, but also the military that were camped out to encounter him, the opposition in Parliament the next day, they have a field day. So they're like, oh, he got back to Punjab, and etc., etc. But they couldn't admit that. As the Congress couldn't challenge it. So it's one of those things that if they say that, nah, he's not one of our guys, he's just, how do you explain then? Because they couldn't themselves explain how it happened. So they were stuck in it. He tied them all up.
Had him under constant surveillance, and it was Baba Gurbachan Singh Manochal wearing his chola, who they were looking at.
Lying down in the bed.
Yeah. And he manages to evade all of this Gherabandi in order to carry out.
And there's, like, the intelligence bureaus involved, state governments are involved, the army's involved. So what does Congress say? Stand up in Parliament and say, no, we had 4 state governments and all our machinery trying to work against this one guy, and he fooled all of us. Or just stay quiet and, he's our guy.
To go give a speech that's anti-Indian government and establishment and Indian politics, like, it's just seems excessive.
It doesn't make sense. But if you know the whole picture, then it just doesn't make any sense.
But it's easier to dismiss him because Sant Jarnail Singh presents a very uncomfortable reality. So it's easier to, like you're saying, like, to dismiss it, and, like, why you're saying it's lazy, right?
In the world of geopolitics, they're like that because so-and-so has propped them up. It's just a very, like, normal way that we, like...
Yeah.
Maybe it's lazy on the part of Punjabis who don't want to have to confront as well that real politics. The Congress bandasi.
Yeah.
Good point. And thank you for going into detail with that one as well. Hopefully that answers the question for a lot of the Sangat at home that, face these questions from their family. The last kind of topic is about genocide. And as we talked about in the last podcast, why do some Sikhs cry genocide and others say we fought as equals and it was a battle? What is the true narrative? And maybe just to add to that from another question that we got was, we faced genocide, but why didn't any international body protest for us like they do for Gaza?
I think we cover both those questions in a lot of detail in the previous podcast, and we go into the exact questions. But essentially, both of those are true. I mean, I don't like the way it's written that we cry genocide. Genocide occurred, systematic state violence occurred, and it is something to be upset about and angry about. The way it sounds is kind of like, so why are we complaining kind of thing, right? It sounds a bit negative and pejorative to me. But that aside, yes, state violence and genocide did occur, and yes, we did fight back. And the genocide occurred because we were fighting against the Indian state. So they're both true. There is a separation of, like, human rights discourse and, like, armed struggle discourse, and that's just a reflection of the kind of way Sikh advocacy has evolved in this following 1984 and following, the Jujaru Sangharsh, and those two kind of been separated out. So I think, we can talk about Sikh suffering, because that's what genocide is, and we can talk about Sikh resistance and liberation in the same breath, and having a holistic picture of that is super important.
We do that with Guru Ityas anyway. We celebrate the Sahibjade. We celebrate the Shahidi of the Sahibjade. We understand the persecution of Sikhs under Wazir Khan and all of that. And then we also celebrate the fact that Banda Singh Bahadur descends on Sirhan that kills Wazir Khan, Sultanand, Shashal Beg, Bashal Beg. We celebrate all of that episode in its entirety. So it can all be true. It can all exist together.
Yeah, the funny thing is in Punjabi, we've always talked about 1984 as the Kalukara. So the Punjabi terminology is about 1984 Kalukara. We don't say 85, we don't say 86, we don't say any of the years up to 95 is a Kalukara. We call that the Sangharsh. So the terminology is quite clear. We had a Holocaust, they attacked us en masse, and then we stood up and fought. So that's the way it's historically reported by Akaal. So on the other side of it is those Sikhs who wanted to fight human rights and stuff, they carried on to this day. They're still dragging police officers into courts. That carries on. And then the other side of the Sangharsh, which is criminalised and seen as dissenting and stuff, that's still criminalised to this day. So both sides of the Sangharsh continue, to the extent that the point in history when we would say the Khalistan Sangharsh is the weakest in terms of militancy, now the Indian state is going outside of India and assassinating people. The ridiculousness is just, it's beyond me. As a person who's studied and done this stuff, it's like when they, SATP, which is KPS Skills website, used to publish the names and addresses of the Karku Jathebandi and Jathedars in Pakistan, the addresses from Lahore on his website. So when we talk about Balaji Singh Panjwad getting assassinated, those addresses were on there years ago. So they had that access to that information, but they never went across border and assassinated. And now we've got no Sangharsh in terms of militancy, yet they're going cross borders and across the world to assassinate and possibly poison people in the UK. And the ridiculousness of it doesn't end. And then we're saying no one believes in Khalistan.
Yeah, and there's no
Sangharsh.
Yeah.
So it's like, where does this all fit? So even I sit at home thinking, what is this? Is like this like some suspended reality? This is my own real play in front of me.
But that's a great point that you made, G, because that was another question that I left out, but it actually fits in perfectly here, which is that there aren't any encounters like the 80s or 90s, in the present day that we hear about. So should we fold with the government and the times?
Well, the thing is, Bargari showed that. Bargari is about Guru Granth Sahib being attacked. Bargari continues today with so many Biadabiyan continuing.
Can you just explain that?
So Bargari was where one sloop was taken from a bend, and the Pendale, the Sacha Sanda followers, row on a wall, come and get your Guru. And they actually ripped the young and put him in the bend. That's what they did. And from that, 2 Sikhs get Shaheed, and Sukhbir Singh Badal is actually named in court papers for giving the police, Samair Sani and people like that, to open fire on these peaceful protesters. So 2 Sikhs get Shaheed there, Balkar Singh, the Krishan Bhagwan Singh. Right? So those 2 get Shaheed there. And then from Bargari, you get the Sarbat Khalsa. So it's not just about the Sacha Sanda, it's about the Tang for Guru Granth Sahib. When anyone talks about Bargari, the Sangat comes out, Lakhan de vich. So the Tang for Guru Granth Sahib, even though the continued Biadabi continues to this day, the Tang for Guru Granth Sahib continues. So even though they're trying to embellish that light, the Guru Granth Sahib Biadabi, if it becomes normalized for these people, then we can get to their heart. That still continues. So that continues. So if we're saying that's our Badshah and our Badshah is getting attacked every day, then we've got no Badshah to an extent. Does that make sense? But so the Sangharsh will never stop until Guru Granth Sahib Biadabi. We're talking about normalization of a situation. If the state can attend a Biadabi incident within minutes and an hour when we catch the assailant, but if the assailant gets away, we get no justice. That's proven in the Biadabi cases. That if we catch the assailant on the spot, the police will be there in an hour, within half an hour, to take the assailant away. But if the assailant gets away, then no one ever finds the person. So the Indian state, can't they find these people? It doesn't matter who's ruling, Akali howe, Bajpa howe, Jera marji in that local area, wherever, whoever it is. So that's a continuation of a Sangharsh against us. And we would, as a Qawm, we would go against anyone who rips up the Gita, the Bible in Punjab. We would rather make a statute in the law to say anyone who does any Biadabi of any Dharmic Granth, give them capital punishment. We'd push that as a statute. That's not just about Gurbani, because that's how strongly we feel for any scripture.
And like that question, like there's no encounters today, but there is the omnipresence of state violence. The threat of the encounter is constantly looming, and that structure that has committed these mass atrocities that we've spoken about, there can never be any compromise, any samajhota, any pledge of allegiance to that structure. It's just the two things can't coexist. We're on a different path now. We're on a path of struggle in Khalistan. So all that question kind of poses that if there were encounters, then we wouldn't work with the Indian government. But that is the reality, because they're like, just one thing Khalra says, this is the Kabran di Shanti, this is the peace, the silence of the graveyard. So this thing that we talk about now, that there's no encounters, like kinne khor loki tusi chahne hai ki wo maran, like how many more people need to die for us to accept that the status quo today, like the status quo is built on our lasha, is built on our the corpses, boiled, burnt alive bodies, children in Harmandir Sahib that have been killed. So what folding in, what compromise, what negotiation? The only negotiation is, when is the Indian state going to withdraw all of its military and police personnel and cross the border and leave Punjab? And then pay reparations for all of the loot and all of the theft of Punjab's river waters. There's no appealing to their moral sense or better sense. There's no possibility of reforming the Indian state. Or the tabahi honi hai, like the same way Baghel Singh Huni captured the Lal Killa. That's the same sentiment that exists post 1984.
These are very short questions. It's just a simple answer. I'd say this one's for Shamsher Singh Ji. When is the Battle of Amritsar documentary going to be released online physically for everyone?
There's some issues with like copywriting some of the footage. It's owned by archival companies, etc. So it's a bit difficult at the moment for us to put online. It's a question of budget. It's a question of like platform as well, like how and where we can distribute it. So we need to, we've been pretty bad at fundraising for it, but we essentially need to raise a significant amount of funds in order to pay off licensing fees, so that we can put it online for distribution and figure out how that would actually work as well. And then, but we also at the same time, which has kind of been a bit of a push and pull for us, is we all of us put a lot of value on the Sangat collectively watching it and having that experience together, because that film was made for the Sangat for that purpose, not as like content to be consumed. So it's a bit of a like, I guess more of all of us are kind of leaning towards that. Let's put it online and let's have it available as a resource. But yeah, it's just a logistics bureaucratic issue at the moment.
Well, just for the Sangat that we said in the previous podcast, that definitely when you do watch it in Sangat, that mahal, the atmosphere is, it's something different, right? So if you haven't checked it out, then please do. The link will be in the description, and do go to your local screening, whether that's in the UK. I know you've gone abroad as well, or they've played it abroad as well in different countries. So definitely, check out their social media page, and definitely go into Sangat and watch that. Good, but hopefully one day it can be available online for the Sangat. Another good question is, where can we actually learn more about 1984?
This podcast.
Any books that you'd recommend, or reading that you guys obviously got by yourself here?
It isn't even that. I think you have to be eclectic. So the Indian side will always be anti what we're saying. So you have to read across sources, but there is a good few books like Tribute 84. You can read a lot of the Jeevani of the sayings and stuff. There's Lost in History 1984 by Ganesha Kaur, which is quite concise. And then you got obviously Joyce Pettigrew, Cynthia Mahmood, and there's so many books that have come out over the last few years as well. We can't keep count of now. But even the Dalit Singh Bittu, they're bringing out more books now as well. That's in Punjabi, and then Carlos House as well. So there's unending resources really now on the internet and stuff as well. So my two books, like Game of Love and Reflections of 1984, we're going to put them on PDFs and they'll be on akaal.publishers.com in a few days. So we're actually going to put on free source now as well.
Yeah, but by Dalit Singh's books, they're in Punjabi, and if you download the Sikh Siyasat app, you can listen to the audio version of those. So I highly recommend that you listen. You get that Sikh Siyasat app. You can get it on whatever Google and Apple. But if you don't understand Punjabi, like sitting down with your family and listening to the audio it is an important experience because you can ask your elders, because that's how we all learn as well, right? Like asking, like Sangat de vicho, all of this knowledge exists in the Sangat, asking each other, learning, asking about different words, vocabularies to fill in little gaps and stuff. So that exercise is super important. Unfortunately, you can't go to one source and learn, like, you know, the ikhtias of this whole period. It's difficult, but hopefully this podcast, like, you know,
Definitely.
touches on a lot of different topics as well.
There's the biography of Sant Jarnail Singh as well, written by Singh Sahib, by SGPC Singh Rodi. So it's in Punjabi and English.
So here it's Sant Khalsa.
Yes, that's it. Sarbat Khalsa. So you can get that as well.
And also, Guru Kripa, we've actually started doing audiobooks through E13 basis of Sikhi, and you know, especially marking 40 years. What we did was that we took one of the books that Sahib has written called The Game of Love, and we have made it into audiobook. So that will be coming out soon as well, to mark 40 years, and hopefully we can do that for more of these books as well. You know, especially since it's 40 years, and trying to do this parachar. Like we said before, that, you know, of course, for, you know, us, this isn't something that, okay, it's 40 years, it's every single day, every single year, but we have to take advantage of these times, right, where we know,
100%.
you know, Sangat are definitely going to be speaking about it more, and do as much parachar as we can.
I want to give a plug to pantpunjab.org and Khalistan Centre, obviously.
Yeah.
But Pant Punjab is a project that's been set up to provide analysis on these contemporary conditions. So there's articles that come out weekly in English and Punjabi that offer a bit more analysis, a bit more kind of a reflection onto a lot of different topics. So I highly recommend those resources.
Any other ones that you guys want to recommend?
Here on YouTube, you can find so much resources on there, like interviews of witnesses of 84 attack or people who fought there as well. So there's a lot of resources now and different podcasts and platforms as well.
Good.
And we've got a bunch of articles and videos on nsyf.org.uk as well. A lot of them, especially on like Smed Saini, KPS Gill, Bibi Amandeep Kaur, Bibi Bimal Kaur, etc. A lot of detail into like issues that Baljit Singh has been really intensely focused on. But like, yeah, the KPS Gill one is actually brilliant. It's a really detailed account of the atrocities that he committed, and same with Smed Saini, and same with which one was the other one that you just said? Bayanok Singh, article on Bayanok Singh as well. Yeah.
Any upcoming projects that we should know about as well?
Baljit Singh's been working on a couple of books, and one of them will be coming out quite soon on Sant Jarnail Singh. So it's a collection of photos and a lot of kind of information and context around those particular photos, because there's a lot of photos floating around, and Kirpa, through this podcast, we were able to actually talk about some of them, and Sangat can see some of the, you know, the photos that we've been talking about, those particular moments. But yeah, putting that all together, and it's kind of a tragedy that doesn't exist in that format. So like getting all of those photos together and like telling that story in that way is important. And another one on like the Khalistan movement as a whole is going to be coming out hopefully soon as well.
Plus, there will be an exhibition coming out on 1984, you know, dedicated to the 40 years by Babbar Akali Lair, Panthak Media, and Khalistan Centre, World Sikh Parliament. So I think that will be worth watching.
Definitely. And we'll put all these links in the description to all the different projects that are taking place. So thank you so much for doing that. So that's it. We've gone through all the questions that have come in through our YouTube channel, Instagram, and different platforms in which people ask their questions. Thank you again to all the panel for answering these questions. And make sure you share this with other individuals as well. There's a lot of great questions in it that debunk a lot of the myths and all the things that people say about Sant Ji, about Khalistan, about that whole era that we just went through. And again, make sure you share this video and let other people know. If you have more questions, please do send those in, because we're hoping to make more videos in the future when it comes to November of this year as well. And again, thank you to everybody. Finish off with the Fateh.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.